Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call this meeting of the City Council of the City of Whitefish for Monday, June 20th, 22 to order. And with that, the first matter on our agenda this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. And with that, I'd like to call on my friend and former councilor, Richard Hildner, to lead us in that pledge. Thank you, Richard. Now it's time on our agenda for public communications from the public, and with that, this is for any member of the public that wishes to address the council or to tell us about anything to approach the dais now. This is for any matter not currently covered by a public hearing this evening. Any member of the public wish to speak to us? Richard.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, councilors, staff, I would like to personally invite you to join in a community forum next the 28th of June at the O'Shaughnessy. So get out your pens and pencils, 6:30 to 8:30. This is a community forum on living with wildfire. It will consist of about a 45-minute documentary that has just been released, followed by another 45 minutes or so of comments from a group of wildland fire specialists and others in our community familiar with the fire environment. It's particularly poignant even though it's been raining and we're in a flood stage in various places. Wildfire is coming our way. And whether it is this summer or the following summer or the following summer after that. But we all need to be prepared, and part of the objective of this community discussion and forum is to learn how to create and maintain a protection zone around your home, to improve the resistance of your home to ignition from ember storms and wildfire, and plan for evacuation and other issues with regards to wildfire. This is going to be, I'm a member of a group called Fire Safe Flathead, which is a consortium of agencies, federal agencies, state agencies, county agencies, city fire departments, the Big Mountain Fire Department, and other interested individuals that meets once a month to deal solely with wildland fire issues. I'm also a member of Flathead Families for Responsible Growth, and as a member of both organizations, I have volunteered to be the coordinator of this program at the O'Shaughnessy, again, next, not this coming, but the next Tuesday, 6:30 to 8:30. And it is, I think, important to recognize that not only is this free and open to all members of the community, that is the greater community, Columbia Falls, Kalispell, Flathead County, and Whitefish, it's important to recognize, I think, that Whitefish is the only municipal entity in Flathead County that is entirely within the wildland-urban interface, not only north of the railroad tracks, but the entirety of the city. So again, I hope that Mr. Deputy Mayor, you and others in the City Council would be able to attend, as well as members of the staff and members of the community. I think it'll be worth your time. So I hope you can attend. Thank you for your time. And your service, as always. All right. And to the wizard in the back room.
Yeah. Richard, thank you. And just as Lisa, come on. Angie, if more members of the council than 2 or 3 were to attend that, do we need to at least publish that fact so that we probably just, I'm thinking out loud now, maybe we ought to plan to do that, post it so that everybody know that there could be 4 or more of us there.
Yeah, if you guys could let us know, maybe 48 hours in advance, we'll post it.
Okay. Next Tuesday. We can save this till later and do that, but that's fine. Okay, Lisa?
Hello, my name is Lisa Jones, and for the sake of my personal safety, I am requesting I not provide my Whitefish home address, but I do live in Whitefish and I own several properties in the city limits. I would like to acknowledge that June is Pride Month, and today is the observed Juneteenth Day. I have shared gifts with the mayor and city councilors in recognition of this important day in American history. Juneteenth marks the date in 1865 when the last enslaved people in America were finally freed. Juneteenth was made an official federal holiday in April 2021, so today is the second year of its national observation. My previous role was working as a contracted PR manager for the Whitefish Convention and Visitor Bureau. During my tenure, we partnered with the city on crisis communications work, including development of a crisis communications plan. We also addressed white supremacist ideology, a neo-Nazi troll storm, and threatened armed march, Ammon Bundy's Spirit of the West conference and protest, the Dark Overlord's cyber attack on our local school, as well as COVID task force outreach. For the record, I resigned from my PR crisis communications role July 1st, 2021, and I am here tonight as a citizen. Although this work was challenging, I enjoyed working with the city staff and mayor and councilors over the years, and I am proud of the proclamations, resolutions, ordinances, and continued efforts we have accomplished in valuing diversity, equity, and inclusion. In fact, it was 1 year ago this month we had our first listening session with people of diverse color, faith, and queer communities to hear and understand their experiences living, working, and visiting Whitefish. I would like to commend the city manager, city attorney, and city administrator for their participation in creating a supportive space for the listening session and moving forward on the initiatives that came out of the session, including attendance at a diversity, equity, and inclusion conference for municipalities, implicit bias training for city staff, and content for a resource page on the City of Whitefish website. Whitefish, unfortunately, has a continual black eye as a haven for extremists, as I still get the reports of publicity that contains the names of white supremacists in context with Whitefish in the form of news articles, blogs, and podcasts occurring weekly to this day. This publicity attracts more extremists, as we have seen with the recent intimidation of and rhetoric sent to our school board members with language I cannot repeat in this setting, but I have made a copy for your reference, which is in front of you now. This is why we have to continue our efforts, speaking loudly on the inclusive values of our community that we have demonstrated, as we cannot let our guard down on our previous laurels. I am here this evening offering to volunteer in any capacity I can to continue these efforts and asking for two specific actions. Number one, officially initiate a city committee including diverse citizens representing historically marginalized, disenfranchised, and oppressed people in our community with the vision of using civic engagement, public awareness, and community building to expand our DEI efforts. I see this committee modeled after existing city committees, such as the one I served on with the professional facilitator in 2008 and 2009 when we studied and then established our dark skies ordinance. I am also requesting the councilors consider making Juneteenth as an official city holiday starting in 2023 to demonstrate your commitment and create more awareness on the focus of diversity, equity, and inclusion in Whitefish. Please let me know how I can voluntarily help in any of these efforts, and I appreciate your consideration and all that you do for our city. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. Any other member of the public wish to talk? Richard? Okay. Oh, you. Any member of the public online that wishes to speak?
We do have two. Mary Flowers, if you'd like to unmute your mic and speak your name and address, please.
Good evening, Mary Flowers, Citizens for a Better Flathead, 135 Main Street in Kalispell for Citizens for a Better Flathead. I want to speak to the two agenda items you have under your consent agenda, both resolutions for annexation. I would like to ask that you pull these items from your consent agenda and allow the public more time to understand what is being proposed here. There is no vicinity map. The site maps within the description provided makes it very difficult to understand. And as we've talked about at previous council meetings, there is no site map, there's no address, there's no physical address, there's no this there's not a description of what's being proposed for zoning. You have a 64.4 acre parcel that by consenting to annex, you are agreeing to provide full services to that parcel, and yet we don't know the demand, and if you can provide services currently. There's just so little information that you're being asked to act on that I think it's inappropriate, and I appreciate the fact that in your work session you noted the need to revise your annexation policy, but I think tabling these to a future meeting would allow the public a little more time to understand what's being proposed, and perhaps for staff to provide you and the public more information and background on these requests. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mary. Michelle, anybody else?
Lindsay Hromadka, if you'd like to unmute your mic and state your name and address, please.
Thank you. My name is Lindsay Ramadka with Weinberg and Ramadka, 116 Lutfer Avenue, Unit B in Whitefish. I am an attorney and represent South Whitefish Neighborhood Association. Some of our directors of the association live adjacent to this parcel that Mary mentioned, that is on your consent agenda. And it is B on your consent agenda, and they were not provided any notice of this, and we were just made aware that this was to be annexed into the city. As far as I can tell, there was no public hearing on this annexation, and so we object to this annexation and the fact that it's being conducted in this way without any kind of public input or public hearing. And we would ask that you guys please pull this from the consent agenda and let the public know what's going on and provide comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. Anyone else, Michelle? With that, I'll call for any reports from volunteer boards this evening. Anybody in the audience on a volunteer board wish to make a report? Any member of council have a volunteer board report? No. Seeing none, I think we'll close that portion of our hearings or meeting this evening and move on to our consent agenda. Certainly.
I'm just wondering if we could have Dave explain what these parcels are, or is that not copacetic?
That's in the agenda. I mean, it's in, the annexation petition is in the agenda.
And we can read through it all, but two people from the public have said they didn't have time to review it and didn't have access.
I think they are requesting additional information is what I heard from them on that. You have the option, Rebecca, to pull these from the consent agenda if you want to have further discussion on them, and that's fine.
Okay, I'd like to pull those two resolutions from the consent agenda for immediate discussion.
So you would, as soon as we approve the remainder of the consent agenda, you would like us to move that into our,
Yeah.
onto our agenda?
Thank you.
So done, we can do that. Yes,
A
Giuseppe?
point of order, is that a motion that requires a second?
It is not.
Just checking, thank
Yes.
you.
So, do I have a motion?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Is there a
I
second?
second it.
Any further discussion on the remainder of the matter that's on the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye, raise their hand. All opposed, like sign. That portion of the consent agenda passes unanimously. Rebecca?
Dave, so I think the confusion might be that people want to know before a zone change or an annexation is done, if there's a proposal that's in play, so they can give input at the time before it's annexed. But do we disclose that to the public in any way, or we just annex things and then later let it unfold?
You know, a lot of annexations come forward with, there isn't a development plan. They might want services for whatever reasons. I can tell you on these two, the 30-acre tract, you know, they're just doing the city-initiated zoning, so it's going to be the equivalent of whatever the county zoning is for that tract. That'll be coming to the July planning board meeting. The second one, the 66.4 acres, that's 90 Edgewood. That's also coming to the planning board in July, and that will have a development plan and a zone change associated with it for the July meeting, so you guys can, you know, review what the zoning is going to be for that parcel. But that, right now, our process is, you know, they come forward with a petition to annex, and then we start the process of either city-initiated rezone to whatever the growth policy calls for, or the equivalent county zoning, and then if they want to do something a little different than the equivalent, then they have to initiate it and come forward, so.
And the point at which the public can oppose something, or
Well, there's,
that would be through the planning board
that'll be
process?
you know, they'll have opportunity, they'll be notified before the planning board hearing.
Yeah.
They'll get notice in the mail, they'll have an opportunity to come to those meetings and hear, you know, if there's a development proposal, and they all can hear about that. If it's just a zone change, you know, like the 30 acres, it's just going to be the comparable zoning. I think it's zone SAG 5 right now. But yeah, there's an opportunity to address the council at that time. You know, and if you guys would, you know, like to change their policy and not approve annexations until the zoning, you know, goes concurrently, I mean, that's something we had discussed as part of our annexation policy. But this is the way it's always been done in the city, and so we haven't actually changed anything. This is the normal process of when someone petitions to annex.
And I guess I'd weigh in too, sorry Dave. You know, petitions to annex, they do not require a public hearing. If you folks want to start having public hearings on them, you could. But under state law, there is no requirement that there actually be a public hearing. The agenda's been published since, you know, last Wednesday. So if you're checking your agenda, then you should be aware that this is happening.
I think we're a city that likes a lot of public involvement, and I think this is just another thing that we might want to look at. If the public feels like they're having enough adequate time to review the data and all that. So thank you for clarifying, both of you, and for the option, the second option, Dave, that we might think about in the future.
Ben, did you have something, Tom?
Can I make a motion?
And I'll just, yes, I would like you to make a motion, and then I'll just clarify something. Angie and Dave, one of the things that, this is not one of those annexations that is conditioned on a particular zone. Unlike Highway 93 South, where the town pump is, that was a conditional annexation based on the zoning they were going to get. This is not one of those. This is just simply a straightforward annexation into the city, no conditional zoning required.
Correct. This is just bringing parcels into the city. There's no conditions on it. They, like Dave said, they will have to go through the entire process of zoning, and the public has input then. But again, I mean, it is not required to have a public hearing for annexations that are by petition. if you folks want to do that, I mean, we can start doing that, but it's just straight bringing them into the city right now, and then they will go through the entire public process of zoning.
Good, super. Ben, I'll entertain a motion. All right, you? Sure.
And just to clarify about the zoning change, that is initiated usually by us once it's annexed to get it in at the most appropriate zone that it was when it was in the county, correct?
Yeah, that's typically the process. You know, if they want something a little bit different, then they have to propose their own process.
Do we wait to hear from them about a particular zone that they want, or do we initiate the
petition to
process?
annex has the proposed zoning written on there.
Okay,
They put that on their application, so that should be in your packet.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else wish to comment? Ben, you had a motion?
Yeah, I would move to approve resolution 22-10 and 22-11.
And I second them.
Any further?
I would like to speak to that.
Yeah.
I just want to say that I don't want to be a broken record because I brought it up here several times, but this annexation process does give me a lot of heartburn for a lot of the reasons that were described. I mean, we are being asked to make a decision on something that is in front of us that we do have very little information. I mean, I went and looked at these up on my own just to try to understand where they were and what the zoning was and how that was going to play out. And I think ultimately, we have a lot of changes I'd love to see in this process, but I don't know how we can do anything about that without revising the whole process. And I know we've already given staff direction to do it. So I guess we'll talk about all that later at a zoning hearing. And for now, I would just move to approve these.
Giuseppe?
Yes, and I would like to concur completely with Ben on this one and reiterate the importance of us finishing the growth policy and looking at the whole city within the vision for the next 50 years will make it easier for us, or for staff, to make those decisions.
Giuseppe, any further comment on the motion? All those in favor? All those opposed, like sign. The votes pass unanimously. Thank you. Next, we're up for our public hearings. We have, I think our next matter is an ordinance 22-09, I guess we are, an ordinance rezoning approximately 13.44 acres of land located at 6335 Highway 93 South. Wendy.
Good evening. So the request before you is kind of precisely what we were talking about just a moment ago. These folks annexed into the city in March and have chosen to select a different zone than what the underlying county zone, which would have been the comparable zone that the city would have initiated. So the zone change is consistent with the recently adopted Highway 93 South Corridor Plan. Again, the property was annexed back in March. The lot is intersected by the future Whitefish Avenue right-of-way, so there's two different land use designations and two different zones on this property. This is behind the little thrift store that's out on Highway 93 South, and it goes all the way to the Whitefish River. I don't know, Michelle, if you could bring up page 56, if you can, or if not, that's fine too. It's on 56 of your packets. So the two zoning districts were selected in conformance with the growth policy future land use map that was depicted and adopted by you folks back in December. The eastern portion of the property is designated as urban, and this is the area along the river. And then the western portion is designated as general commercial. So they're proposing to designate the portion along the highway between where Whitefish Avenue will extend out to the highway as WB2, which currently it's designated as County B4. That's the complementary zone to that. The back eastern portion, they're proposing to designate as WR2, where the county designation is R3. The property is located at 6335 Highway 93 South. And again, has the B4 and R3 zoning districts and the general commercial and the urban land use designation. The property is surrounded by commercial uses, the Whitefish River, and residential uses. The property is served by all public services and facilities. We did notice adjacent landowners, place a legal in the paper, notice advisory agencies. We did receive one letter included in your packet about the time of planning board with concerns with the change in character to that neighborhood. We review these according to the criteria in the zoning regulations. This request is being made in accordance with the future land use map in the recently adopted Highway 93 South corridor plan, which splits this property into a WB2 and a WR2, or in the urban and the general commercial, which is consistent with the WB2 and the WR2. The property is served by the City of Whitefish Police and Fire Departments. Public services and utilities are available and adjacent to the property. City sewer runs through the property where Whitefish Avenue will be located. And water is located in both Highway 93 South and Lena Joy along the south. And this property is located within the city's extension of services plan. This was an island of county in the middle of the city. Water and sewer will be reviewed at the time of some future development plans. And all the zoning setbacks will provide adequate light and air. The property is served by Shiloh Avenue and Lena Joy, which are city-owned roads to the south, and then Highway 93 to the west, which is a state highway. Again, this is an infill project in the city limits, and it's adjacent to public streets with access to the highway. While the development will increase traffic at some point in the future, that will be reviewed at the time of subdivision or other development proposals. This property is adjacent to the Whitefish River, which could provide an extension of the trail system. The project is compatible with the urban growth and is identified as urban and general commercial in the growth policy. Again, this is an infill project surrounded by residential and commercial uses. This rezone will facilitate residential housing and commercial development along the highway. And as far as encouraging the most appropriate use of land throughout the jurisdiction, again, this is consistent with the Highway 93 corridor plan, so it is consistent and appropriate. The planning board held a public hearing on May 19th. The applicant presented the rezone. No other member of the public spoke. The planning board did recommend approval subject to 5-1, Ellis voting in opposition. Can I answer any questions for you?
Any questions for Wendy on her staff report? Steve?
Just a point of clarification, Wendy. It is likely that at the time of any development or whatever they come in with, we would require them to extend Whitefish, or is that Whitefish Avenue?
Or Shiloh or whatever.
Shiloh.
Shyfish.
Well, Shiloh is adjacent, right?
Yeah, yeah.
We would probably require them to extend that street.
Oh, yeah, that definitely will be a requirement.
Okay, just wondering. Thank you.
Rebecca?
Sorry. Reading through the planning board minutes, John Ellis asked, and you said that this would normally have come in at WR1.
If it was a city-initiated annexation, yeah. They chose.
So when we initiate, we would do whatever's going to match, but someone that's coming in to ask for the zone change can request a higher density.
Yeah, if they're going to ask for something different, we ask them to apply and make the case before you folks as to why it is that they wanted something different. If they're just going from like to like, the closest equivalent, then the city will initiate that. And
so
they're asking for WR2, where the like zone would have been WR1.
So how much more density are we talking? Because it looks like they've avoided a PUD this way too.
Right, which would be another zone change. So they're asking, their interest, and the applicant can certainly describe this, is to do townhouse development similar to what's been happening in that neighborhood. To the south, it's all 8-plexes and 6-plexes, and then to the north, there's also townhouses. So that's their intention, is to do 2-unit townhouses, and so they just...
But the WR1 is all along the river though, isn't it?
Right, but everyone has done a PUD overlay in order to get that higher density and to be able to develop townhouses.
But the adjacent property to one part of this is WR1, not WR2.
Right, yeah. To the north, it's WR1, which is the back 2/3 or something of the Les Schwab. And then
Yeah.
to the north of that is Riverview Meadows subdivision, where they have a 5-unit townhouse, and they did a PUD overlay from the WR1 in order to get the townhouses. And then to the south is also WR1 with a PUD overlay in order to get townhouses. These folks are coming to you and just, we want to do townhouses, we want to do WR2.
So if they did WR1, how many houses could be built versus townhouses could be built? Like, what's the differential in density on that property then? Because I can see why neighbors might be a little concerned about this, not knowing what's coming at them with the zone change. And so I'm just wondering how much more.
I didn't do that math, I don't have
Okay.
a way to do that. We can calculate it over here and let you know here in a second.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we've got a public hearing coming, so you should be able to get you an answer by the time the public hearing's over. We propose, this is slated for a public hearing this evening, and I'd like to open up that public hearing now and give the proponent or applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then we can take any other members of the public. Is the applicant here and wishes to speak to us? Thank you. Come.
All right, I'm Dominic Goebel. I work for Morris Summarily, the engineering firm in Kalispell. I represent True North Partners, the owner and applicant of this. So, like Wendy was saying, we are proposing townhomes in this area. We kind of looked at what's the natural zoning for our proposal. Looked at WR2, looked at the surrounding areas that we're going to be developing. We'll be matching the existing developments. So we, rather than go through the PUD process, we were looking at what's more straightforward to get what we were wanting. And so we chose the WR2 that sublots and townhomes are permitted use.
Any questions for the applicant before we continue with the public hearing?
Do you know how many townhomes you're building there?
Right now we have proposed 27 lots, so it'd be 54 sublots or townhomes. We're meeting with the site review committee on Thursday to discuss this and then start the process of the subdivision.
Okay, thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other member of the public wish to speak to us on this matter? Michelle, anybody online? Not seeing any. I'll close the public hearing and turn it back to council for at least a motion to begin with. Yes.
Go ahead.
Carry on. Yes?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I move to adopt Ordinance 22-9, rezoning approximately 13.44 acres of land located at 6335 Highway 93 South, known as Tract 1BB in Section 1, Township 30 North, Range 22 West, PMMM, Flathead County, Montana, from County R-3, which is one family residential, and County B4, which is secondary business, to WR2 and WB2, and adopting both the staff and the planning board recommendations.
I'll second.
Motion's been moved and seconded. Giuseppe, do you want to speak to your motion?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yes, I do. Again, we're sitting here in quasi-judicial capacity, so I'm bound to follow the city code, to follow the rules, the staff work, and the planning board, which we have for a reason. Planning board passed it 5-1, and I know a lot less than all these beautiful people do, hence I move to approve and move on.
Thank you, Giuseppe. Any other comments on the matter? Not seeing any. All those in favor, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Matter approves 4-1 with Councilor Norton in opposition, or 5-1. 5-1. Moving on to our next public hearing, which will be ordinance 2210, an ordinance approving the MG Ventures mixed-use plan unit development to develop a 3-story mixed-use building on 37 acres at 509 East 6th Street and 806 Spokane Avenue. First reading. Wendy.
Okay. So once again, this is a mixed-use PUD on 2.237 acres at 509 East 6th and 806 Spokane Avenue. The applicant is proposing to develop a 3-story mixed-use building with commercial on the first floor, 4 residential units on the second and third floor for a total of 8 units. They're going to have underground parking with 11 spaces and a small commercial area down on that ground floor with the parking. Gross density of the site is 3.58 dwelling units per acre. Parking is located in 3 areas of the project. 9 spaces are proposed to be located along East 6th Street, 11 spaces under the building, and the remaining parking will be located in a parking lot to the south of the building, currently on an adjacent lot. Vehicles will access the parking under the building by a one-way driveway from the north to the south, and then continue past the building to the south through the 806 property, riverfront property, and exit near the new, or that Apres Whitefish Lodge. The parking lot to the south will contain 24 spaces, and they're proposing a minimum of 6 spaces dedicated for public use to access the bike path and the Whitefish River. The applicant will construct the parking lot and drive aisles accessing that lot. They're also proposing to dedicate Lot 6, with the exception of the parking lot and drive aisles, to the city for parkland as a community benefit. No other improvements will be made to the parkland. The applicant is asking for 4 zoning deviations. They wish to exceed the 35-foot building height up to 45 feet. This is due to the topography of the site, which they'll be able to explain to you better than I can. They want to permit off-street parking in the front yard setback. For a corner lot, the shorter of the 2 is considered the front, and so East 6th is considered the front. And they're proposing, which there currently is parking along East 6th, and they're proposing to maintain that, where the WB2 does not permit parking in the front yard setback. They want to permit required parking off-site. The 24 parking spots currently are located on a separate parcel to the south of this lot. And then development along the Whitefish River requires a buffer of top of bank or 75 feet, whichever is greater. This property's been significantly graded over the years and was the staging area when they were working on the river remediation a number of years ago. So the top of bank is indiscernible, and so they're able to use the 75-foot buffer. And then there's also a 20-foot structural setback. The current layout shows the building is outside the buffers and the setback, but some of the parking may end up being it with the final design, so they may need some deviations to the river buffer and setback. The application indicates that they'll use buffer averaging, which allows the buffer to be a little narrower in some places and a little wider in other places, provided the overall buffer is not reduced. But again, we don't have the final design for this parking area, and so there may be some places where we will need some reduction in the buffer. They are providing some benefits in exchange for zoning deviations. They are providing a little bit more than 1 acre of riverfront property to the city for the purpose of a park. This would also access the trails and the river. As part of this, they're proposing a minimum of 6 parking spaces dedicated for public use. Currently, there is a gravel path on this property that's in a temporary easement that connects the paved trail along the river at Baker Park, and then it's also, I believe, paved as it kind of goes downstream. They're also improving public facility access with this dedication. There's a major sewer easement or sewer line that runs through this property, and having this property within city ownership better enables access to the sewer easement or sewer line for long-term maintenance. Currently, the property is developed with 1 commercial building on the north, and then the remainder of the property to the south is vacant. It is surrounded by commercial uses and the Whitefish River. The property has access to all public services and facilities. We provided notice to the neighbors and advisory agencies and put a legal in the paper, and we also provided the information on the city's webpage. As of the time of planning board, we did receive 1 comment with one neighbor concerned about the changing nature of this neighborhood away from residential. We review PUD according to the criteria in the zoning regulations. Under environmentally sensitive areas, The properties are located along the Whitefish River, and as I described the river buffer to you, they are providing, the building is not located in the buffer or the setback. The water quality protection regulations do require a geotech analysis for development on a lot within 200 feet of the river buffer, so staff has recommended that as a condition of approval, that we can review that at the time of building permit. The application indicates that they'll be doing buffer averaging, so we'll want to see a final report on the buffer averaging. And then the dedication of this property to the city will help preserve the environmentally sensitive area in perpetuity. And then finally, staff would also recommend, and we've added this as a condition, that the existing trail be relocated no closer to the river than it currently exists. So this will possibly require some design work, kind of where it narrows down a bit. Development must be sensitive to and respectful to wildlife habitat or seasonal migration corridors. This area hasn't been identified as crucial habitat, but it's likely that bear, deer, and other animals certainly move through this area and will continue to do so after development. Preservation of the buffer will continue to provide habitat for small birds and animals. And then as part of living with wildlife, and throughout all of town, they will be required to secure their garbage. We did notify Fish, Wildlife, and Parks of this application, but we didn't receive any comments. The applicant, under open space, is proposing to dedicate the riverfront property to the city for parkland purposes. They are required to dedicate up to 30% of open space for the PUD, and this is quite a bit more than that minimum 30% required. This park will be open to the public for both access to the river and the trail along the river and the proposed parking lot. The applicant did present their proposal to the park board in May, and the board unanimously recommended the city council accept the parkland dedication with a minimum of 6 parking spaces, which are to be assigned as available for public use. And the parking lot and drive aisles will remain in private ownership, so they'll be maintaining it and plowing it and taking care of it. The park board also discussed an ADA parking space and the importance of wayfinding to access the trail and the parking, both like up on Spokane and on East 6th, because it'll be one way, and so folks know how to get down there. Staff would still like to see more parking. We think this is going to be a pretty popular park. We would like to see 10 to 12 parking spaces set aside for public access. We think there's going to be a number of people that are going to be accessing this, maybe leaving a car on one end and boating down from, like, say, City Beach. So that is certainly something you can discuss further. The applicant is proposing to develop a separate private dock and path to the river on their private lot, and this will just be an amenity for the folks that live there, which is pretty common, you know, as you float down the river. I'm sure you've noticed that. Development within the buffer and along the Whitefish River do require permits from other agencies, including the Conservation District, and we have recommended that as a condition of approval. Under character and qualities of the existing neighborhood, the character of this neighborhood is a mixture of commercial, hospitality, and residential uses. This lot is the most northerly lot of the WB2 before it transitions into residential zone, a WR4 to the north, which is older neighborhood with single-family homes that have been slowly transitioning to commercial type uses. This proposed building is considerably taller than the existing single-family building that's there and the buildings to the north. Buildings to the south, though, along the river are multi-story and will be more comparable to this type of building, but this is going to be one of the biggest buildings in this immediate vicinity. They do have to go to the Architectural Review Committee to get their plan reviewed, and those types of fitting into the neighborhood will be part of that review. No street improvements are proposed nor required with this project. No frontage improvements are required. There is an existing sidewalk along Spokane Avenue, which is also a state highway. A sidewalk is proposed to connect the East 6th Street frontage to Spokane Avenue, and a front entrance plaza is proposed at the intersection. Within the development, pedestrian and bicycles will have access to the parking lot and river trail along with the shared vehicular driveway. Staff has recommended a condition of approval to sign or otherwise indicate the shared aspect of this driveway. And the location of the project is well situated to take advantage of other non-motorized transportation with the bike path, well-connected sidewalks, and the seasonal snow bus. The project will be considerably, again, larger than existing single-story structure and the buildings to the north. The current design provides a variety of materials and interests, and again, the project will be required to go to the ARC review to ensure neighborhood compatibility. Staff has reviewed the preliminary water, sewer, and stormwater information, and Public Works did not note any concerns. Land use designation is general highway commercial. And the property is also located within the recently adopted Highway 93 South Corridor Plan. One of the goals in that plan is the connecting fragmented sections of the Whitefish River Trail within the corridor. And for the city to acquire or obtain permanent easement from property owners along the river for trails, parks, and river access. Just to review the proposed zoning deviations, the applicant is requesting a deviation to exceed the building height and go up to 45 feet. And I'm sure you saw in the drawings where the 35 feet is and where the 45 feet is. We do measure building height from adjacent natural grade. So at no point when a property is sloping down can the building exceed 35 feet from natural grade. So they're finding challenges with that top level and due to the sloping nature of the site. So staff thinks this is a small request and the community benefit outweighs the zoning deviation, and no protrusions would go above 45 feet. Parking in the front yard setback. So currently there are 21 parking spaces located in front of the two buildings along East 6th Street. This building was constructed in 1979, well before this parking standard was in place. So it's a existing legal non-conforming use. It appears 6 spaces will remain for the existing office that's to the west, plus the 9 for this new building. Because the site currently operates in the state and it's not proposing to expand, but is actually a reduction of about 6 parking spaces, staff is comfortable with this zoning deviation. So the applicant, again, indicates that they'll use buffer averaging to install the parking lot once the final design is developed. But just in case that they might need a deviation to that buffer, we are comfortable with the request to reduce the buffer, and we will ensure that the final design locates the parking drive aisles and pedestrian access as far as possible from the river. Under the original proposal, the entirety of Lot 6 was going to be dedicated to the city as parkland, including the entire parking lot. The park board and staff believes it's cleaner for the parking lot to be held privately with a minimum of 6 spaces dedicated for public use. Because the parking lot is going to be maintained in private ownership and wrapped into the main lot with the main building, that zoning deviation for off-site parking is no longer required. So again, in exchange for these zoning deviations, they're offering public access and a parkland of a little more than 1 acre and 6 parking spaces, and then access to the city's sewer main along Spokane Avenue. So the planning board held a public hearing on May 19th. The applicant's representative, 2 members of the public spoke at the hearing. The planning board did recommend unanimously with 2 amendments that the one amended condition of approval was that the building height deviation is permitted only as shown in the supplied east and west elevations. Deviations from these elevations excepting the elevator shaft shall be considered a major deviation requiring approval from the planning board and city council. I think there was concerns at the planning board that if they said, okay, yeah, you can go up to 45 feet, that somehow along East 6th Street, it would go up to 45 feet where the plans only show kind of little corners as it goes down the hill. So this is just to clarify that this isn't granting 45 feet to the entire building, just that small portion. And then the other clarification was condition 10E, that an easement for sewer line and public access on the driveway and parking lot would be provided. Just to hit some of the highlights of the conditions. So again, we're up to, I think, 16 conditions of approval. We want the parkland to be dedicated to the city along the Whitefish River, excluding the parking lot and drive aisles with a minimum of 6 parking spaces. We would like to see wayfinding signage be installed at East Sixth Street to identify public access to the park and parking, and that signage type needs to be coordinated with Public Works and the Parks Department. We don't want to see the trail located any closer to the Whitefish River than it currently exists. The applicant will need to obtain approach permits from MDT. Before submitting a building permit, we've asked, of course, they'll have to go to architectural review. We want to confirm that the parking standards for the building to the east are still being met. Final acceptance of all improvements, including the parking lot, drive aisle, water, sewer, stormwater, all that good stuff needs to happen. The property must be dedicated to the city. A lot line adjustment must be recorded, eliminating the lot lines under the building and to include that parking lot as part of their lot. We request a geotechnical letter be submitted with the building permit and a final report with the Whitefish River buffer averaging detail. And then finally, we talked about this last week at our Conservation District City Council joint meeting, that other permits may be required by governmental agencies and the owner is responsible for obtaining these permits, which may include a floodplain permit, permits from the Conservation District, and a water quality protection permit. So kind of the catch-all, you have a responsibility to go get the permits. There's one other condition I was gonna. Hang on. So we want the trail to be relocated no closer to the Whitefish River than it currently exists where they're putting the drive aisle. And we also want the applicant to pave the entirety of the trail along Lot 6 and obtain all the required permits for this path. That's about it.
Questions for Wendy on her staff report? Start with Giuseppe and then we'll move down.
Yes, Wendy, thank you. If there is a motion to approve and if there is an amendment to go from 6 spots, parking spots, to 12 dedicated to public, would that be a substantive change to require this project to go back to the planning board?
No.
Thank you.
Reed?
Thank you. Wendy, I have a few questions for you. The first one, just refresh my memory. The ARC can't change the size of a building, can they? Or can they?
The what can't
The
you?
size, the Architectural Review Committee.
I mean, they could ask for modifications to make it fit into the neighborhood.
Okay.
I
But
mean,
they
they
couldn't
can't make
say,
it taller or bigger.
they couldn't say this is too big, you have to make it smaller.
Well, I mean, I think there's different ways to address massing and scale that they could ask.
Okay, thank you. The next one is, there's no requirement to build the parking lot that's dedicated to the public first, correct?
I think we
I
put that
couldn't-
in, yeah. So, condition number 10, prior to
Okay.
submitting any building permit, we want final acceptance of all the improvements, including the parking lot. So before they submit a building permit, they need to have the parking lot in and accepted by Public Works.
Okay, thank you. I didn't quite understand that. And then the last one that I have is just, so 95 Caro is also a PUD, correct?
Correct,
And they are building a trail down there
correct.
eventually, hopefully. What's the situation with their dock?
Their dock was gonna be open to the public.
Okay, and
It was quite a bit bigger. It was pretty good size.
and it's dedicated to the, so, and that was one of the conditions, is that it had to be,
That's what they
Public dock.
proposed. They proposed that. We didn't tell them they had to do it that way.
okay, but they said we're gonna build the trail and build a
Yep.
public dock.
Yep. And all their land is still held in private ownership. The trail is gonna be private. It's just gonna be open to the public, where this is gonna be public land with a public trail.
The trail's not gonna go on any of their private land.
I don't think
It has
so.
to cross it if they're gonna have a dock that's below it,
There,
correct?
there may be some easements on the existing private property.
We would have an easement with the 95 Caro project for the trail to go through there, correct?
Right. But I think the area where they're proposing to build their private dock already has a trail on it. It's already got a paved trail. so I would assume we have some sort of easement there already.
Okay, thank you.
Ben?
I've got a couple if you don't mind. My first question to staff is, if you could describe a little bit what the end result of this park is going to be. Like what's it going to look like? Is there going to be a dock? How are people going to use it?
The park will be city parkland, and it'll be up to the park board what the park's going to look like. They haven't talked about it at all yet, have they?
The park board has not identified what the park would be used as at this point. We don't have a conceptual plan for it.
What's your view, Maria, of the usefulness and value of the park itself to the community?
It would serve as a river access point along our river trail, just as all the other river parks have. So definitely access to the river. Essentially, we would probably put in a dock at some point. If the topography allows, it's a little steep in the area that the city would be obtaining. We just have to evaluate if we could get people down to the river easily for a dock.
If no dock is able to be built, does it still have, is the value of this parcel reduced to the community?
I don't believe so, because we would gain the path. We'd be able to keep the path through the park, and it still serves as open space. It protects that river corridor, and it's an area where people could still sit and enjoy the river.
Thank you. Wendy, there was a drawing submitted in public comment from Mr. Bruce Booty. And it looks like he did some markups on the site plan, and it looks like the main difference there is the presence of a boulevard with street trees, which is not what's there today. I was wondering if you could comment on that drawing.
Yeah, I mean, it's, of course, Spokane Avenue is a state highway. Maybe Craig could provide some insight. I think, certainly we could see if MDT would allow us to do something like that, but I'm just not certain.
I apologize. I might have missed the drawing earlier today. Yeah, it looks like just the street trees. I don't know if he's proposing anything different with the trail, but Spokane Avenue is a state right-of-way, and the state would not allow any of those improvements in the right-of-way without an actual written agreement, and they require those agreements to be with the city. So I think if council were so inclined to enter into an agreement with the state for those trees, they could be placed, but traditionally we would do a project like this on a much broader scale. For example, Highway 93 West, where we're responsible for all the trees, all the lights, all the improvements that don't involve the pavement, curb, and gutter.
I mean, how valuable do you think it is to the community to have such a boulevard for pedestrian safety, I would imagine, as well as aesthetics?
I think it's important, but I think this is a very short section of the corridor. I think this would come, as I mentioned, in a broader scale.
Okay. Thank you. My next question, well, just to stay with you, Craig, could you elaborate a little bit? There was a benefit having to do with the sewer line, and I wasn't entirely clear on what that is. Could you elaborate on the public benefit of the sewer line?
Yeah, so the city's main sewer interceptor runs through this property in an existing easement, but we do not have access to that easement, so construction of this parking lot would give the city significant access improvements to that large sewer facility.
In the event it ever needed to be replaced or
just maintained. Yeah.
Okay. Wendy, what would happen if the conservation district had a disagreement about something, or Department of Transportation regarding the access to the highway? What would happen to this application?
And I guess they would come back to us and talk to us about what the disagreement is about and see if there's some way that we can remediate that.
Okay.
You know, if there's one of the things John Ellis said at our planning board meeting is that he could imagine the conservation district asking the trail to be scooted in a little bit closer to the parking lot instead of where it currently is, but that currently has been a gravel trail for, I don't know, how long has it been there?
We've had that agreement with Charreg for quite some time.
Yeah, so the existing gravel trail has been there for quite a bit of time, so he thought that adding pavement might require it to be reconstructed in a different location.
And then my last question is, with respect to the number of parking spots that has come up several times, if the city were to request a larger number of parking spots, what does that do for the required parking of this building? I mean, if we, for example, asked for 12 instead of 6, what would that do as far as the applicants' parking
As I
standards?
calculated that what parking they needed, they had adequate parking. If they only needed 12 more spaces in that parking lot.
And there's how many there now?
24 are in that parking lot.
So if they had 12 and we had 12, it would meet.
It would meet the standards for the current use of the proposed building.
Okay.
I think they weren't sure, you know, the long-term use of the building, like if they changed that first floor from offices to restaurants, say, or a doctor's office, those two uses require more parking. So I think they're kind of providing some flexibility for themselves.
See. I mean, do we have any view on how many parking spots we would like the community would use in such a development? I know it's a hard question.
Yeah, we did an evaluation of other park areas along the river, and we had anywhere from 16 to probably 12 to 16, I believe. It's without knowing what the park will be used for, it's hard to then give you an answer of we need exactly this number, but I can tell you Riverside Park has, if lined properly, if you could see the lines, we counted 16 spaces there, and that's full quite regularly. So if it is used as a water access point, we could anticipate that it would use the 12 spaces.
Thank you. That's all I got.
Rebecca, any questions?
Thank you. I just have one for Craig. There were stability issues along this bank, and at one point we had talked about turning it into a one-way road even. Has that been mitigated?
The city reconstructed that section of 6th Street and Central Avenue in 2019, I believe. I mean, there were a number of opportunities that council looked at during that project, one of which was just to make it a dead end. Second option was one way, and the third option, which council opted to move forward with, was maintaining a two-way street with sharrows for, bicycles and pedestrians. So that work has been done. The slump has been mitigated on a couple of occasions over the years, but yeah, there's a good chance it's going to continue to go.
But the geotech report should show us what they're dealing with before they build out, right? That
Oh
could've-
yeah, there's definitely going to be a geotechnical report required with this structure.
That's my only concern, is that it might be more unstable than we realize, but okay, thank you.
Councilor Fury, any questions for staff? We proposed a public hearing on this matter at this time. I'd like to open up the public hearing now and give the applicant an opportunity to speak first, and then we'll take the remainder of public hearing, or public comment. Thanks.
There we go. Hi, Aaron Wallace, 265 Hawks Lake Lane, Whitefish, Montana. I'm the architect and principal for this project. Little background and history on this one. So this one came onto my desk, I think Monty and I started talking about this in 2019. So it's gone through a bunch of different options here over the years. When we first looked at the piece, what can we actually get on here? What can the site support? And we found out pretty quickly that due to the grade changes and the way the site works, parking was a big, huge concern. We just weren't able to get much more on that site with the existing parking requirements that were out there. So a few years passed, we actually, in our firm, looked at this site south of the property, the one we're proposing to be dedicated to the park, for several different other groups. In fact, TD&H, our civil engineer here, also looked at this for different groups. And that piece of property is basically undevelopable. It's too much into the floodplain, setbacks. There's a big sewer easement, right, or sewer that goes underneath the main part of property, and there's about 1,500 square feet in a weird little thin triangle that you could actually build a building on. So it became a piece that had been on the market for quite some time, and I think that the city had even looked at it at one time for possibly purchasing for possible park space too. Well, about this time last year, Monte came back and said, hey, look, if I can get this at a good price, that it makes it worth developing, what can that do for us? And we took a look at the project and said, hey, you know what, we're able to get a building with about 2 stories of residential units, 8 units, that's all right underneath zoning. Space, you're about 5,000 square feet that he needed for his office space to replace that he were currently taking down. And then we were able to get the underbuilding parking and a small commercial space out to the river. So that was the overall development process. Now, when we looked at it, we could get access then around the corner and down to the site, and then get additional parking up along the river. Knowing that we are going to be, because of the natural grade changes and how it works, where it slopes off towards the river there, we knew that we'd be exceeding a few things and with other, the parking aspect as it currently sits. So we looked at this and said, hey, how can we make this a win-win? And if we sat there and got this and were able to do our development with some of these small deviation changes related to the zoning aspect of it, related to some height as it slopes down towards the river, it's really not visible from the streetscape. Add some additional parking and do a little bit of buffer adjustment. We might not even need it. It's just a weird, complicated task based on the final design. And then being able to reuse this parking that's been used in the same manner it has for the last 40 years now, 50 years almost, and continue to use in the same manner we have. We felt that that was a win for us to do the development, and the city could get a 1 acre piece park on a piece of land on the city river, or on the river, to do park for themselves and do what they wanted with it. And we felt that in today's world, of the amount of activity that's on the river, amount of pressure that is getting in other park spots, this would be a great opportunity for the city at no cost to acquire that piece of land. And it'd be a win-win for everybody. So that's what kind of the path we went to propose back to city staff and said, hey, what options, what do you guys are looking for here? And this is kind of they said, come back with a solution. These are our thoughts, and this is what we kind of came up with. So Park Board was very excited about this. Planning Board, unfortunately, I wasn't able to be there, but I heard some of their concerns, and we've got some of the other concerns that I'll address real quickly related to the public comment. There's a lot of nuances to this design, a lot of little tricky spots and corners and heights and slopes and design aspects related to that, and I'd be happy to answer any of those nuances if you guys have any questions related to that. But I think we've got a concept design here that will work and satisfies a lot of the different needs of the city and also the developer. Ultimately, what we're asking for is kind of the 35 height deviation related to natural grade. So in your packet, you'll kind of see an image where it shows a 35-foot height cut plane and a 45-foot height cut plane. We're very conscious of the height concerns here related to the neighborhood. In fact, the first floor is sunk down 2 feet to help reduce that impact along the street front along 6th Street and 93 there. We've kept the ceiling heights to 9 feet. Try to keep our floor packs as low as possible. I know that there were some concerns in Planning Board about the overall height boxing nature of some of these buildings, and we also went to ARC Review, got their comments back. They didn't really have any concerns about the flat roof aspect of it or the overall height and massing related to it. They felt that the south, or the north and the east facades needed to be improved, and they're absolutely correct. These are concept in nature, but they could see how it would work down the hill and the slope. They asked if there is any, who would be able to actually see that area which was exceeding the 35-foot height limit, and the only people who would be able to see it is from the river. So why are we doing that? Well, what we want to do is use the natural topography and grade to be able to wrap around the drive access and get under building parking, get 11 spots in the building. That's a great benefit for the users of the building. And also, it helps alleviate how much asphalt we're putting in the remainder of the site. So we didn't want to put any more parking down into that flat area as we had to. This allows us to do that. So from the street side, this building is going to, the two street sides, this is going to appear as a 35-foot or the standard height building or less. So that's a big goal of ours, to try to keep that as minimal as possible. Another concern was, the number of parking spots. We kind of had a discussion back with the city. They said, well, we want more. And we said, well, we want to give you less. And what is the amount how do you substantiate, what is the actual need here and numbers like that? And I don't think anybody had a great answer at that point. I know the 16 spots up out at the park further north along the tennis courts, that gets hit pretty heavily. I know, and so they've got 16 spots there full a lot. I know the one further up by our office along the river and the railroad tracks doesn't have any really parking spots, and people don't access that, seem to have any sort of parking issue there. And I would think that this park acts in that way fairly closely. It isn't going to be heavily trafficked except by locals, I think, coming in and getting in and out of the river. It's sunken down. You can't really see it quite as much. It's not in a main thoroughfare. But what our solution was that we needed 12 parking spots to meet our zoning requirements right now. And so we'd have those signed, and those would basically be used as secondary for the parking for the residences and also for staff parking to be able to put down there. 6 that would be signed for the city for public use, and then we would leave 6 unsigned at this point. So while we're saying that 6 would be dedicated all the time, they'd just be signed accordingly, and if there was overflow needs, people certainly be able to park in those unsigned things without any repercussions. I don't think Monte is in the business of monitoring those heavily unless there's an issue. Usually there's an when people in the residences want to use those as secondary parking, those people would probably, be in the evenings and there wouldn't be quite as much usage. And that's how we typically see those parking spaces work. Why would we want to keep those extra 6 underneath our name versus the city's name? Well, as Wendy pointed out, right now the current use is for commercial space, business, the realtor's office, and the residential uses. If we change it to an idea of a restaurant or business or different type of a use for that commercial space, which is certainly a possibility, then there's certainly a need probably for more parking spaces that now we can't do because we don't have it. We gave that away to the city. So we'd still need to meet whatever kind of allowances we have with underneath not the 44, but the 38 parking spots that would be needed to us. We wouldn't take the 6 back from the city, of course. So that's why we're asking to keep those mounts as much as high as we can. We feel that the benefit to the city for the additional park is a big one. There's quite a bit of costs and infrastructure that we have to put in to make that happen. So we feel that keeping those underneath our controls is a pretty big need at this point. There's also some imagery. I think the one came through today for the different boulevard work along the highway there. We're certainly agreeable to sitting down with the state, MDT, seeing what they're agreeable to, what the city can kind of come up with to help improve that. It's a complex, quick slope down that hill. So, besides sitting down and like as Wendy and Craig said, there might be a longer term plan. I know they've been working on things on those corridors, what that is and how it coordinates with this piece of property. We're not quite sure. There's areas that are easy to put those type of boulevard trees in, and then areas that are not. It drops off pretty quick. We certainly will have a geotech report on this project. It's pretty much a standard in any project we do now in the city of Whitefish just because of the soil concerns. This development is basically going to sit where the existing building is at. So there's, they have not had any issues with slumping or, that building having any sort of issues slope going down the hill at this point. So we don't feel that there's going to be much of a concern there for the building itself, but that's certainly something we're going to be looking into. Yeah, I think that covers a lot of it. We have our civil engineer here. I guess I'd be happy to, and Monty's at home with COVID, so he could speak a little bit after we get done. But I'd like to answer any questions that you guys may have related to the design or overall project.
Any questions for Aaron so far? Sure, Steve.
So Aaron, I don't know how familiar you are with the path to the river where your proposed dock is.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a pretty significant question about the ability to develop, for the city to even develop anything that gets down to the river. And that's my concern, is that we would build a park without any access to the river. And I don't know how useful that would be if we don't require that to be public access. So,
So a couple things. There's a proposed dock that's on our property. Currently, the city has an easement to go across Monte's property for the bike path. We would be putting a dock on the opposite side, on the riverside of that. That would be a private dock. Once you transition kind of around that tight corner, that then gets deeded over to the city off the existing thing. So the city would own the property from the edge of the parking all the way to the river. And I would think that they would be able, you guys to see. So we thought it best to unload off of our shoulders and put it on yours and what that park is. Okay, we haven't, besides deeding it over to the city, we haven't gotten into any design issues. This has been, hey, do you guys want it? The park board has come back and says, yes, we'd love to have it. Now what that it is, you guys get to develop that idea accordingly. We do have a little bit of a concern right now with saying that we're required to do the paved bike path along there. Currently, the city has, I think, a monthly lease with the current ownership to use that gravel bike path as an easement that can end any month. Monte now owns that piece. That's why one of those conditions isn't required anymore, or one of the things we're asking for. So, you know, I agree. I think that park area needs development. And what does that become? What's the vision of that? We haven't gone down that path. But I would think that the city would be able to access and then put a, you know, I've seen a lot more difficult sites to get down to a dock than the one that's currently out there. So I think it's certainly achievable. Now, what size, big, how, where, you know, that's something that would need to be developed from the city standpoint.
Any question? Oh, go ahead. Rebecca?
So this will be a one-way road, and
Correct.
then do you have an agreement with the hotel to the south of this site to access their driveway as you leave as an exit point onto Highway 93?
So the entrance exit into that site is split evenly between our property and their property. So the right lane is on their side, the left lane is on our side. So, and typically in the other projects we've dealt with that, such as down at Don K, and also 93 other projects, there is no issue there. It's a shared agreement to move back between, you know, using the access on one side or the other property. So
But you have this in writing?
I don't personally have that in my writing. It's typically part of the title report, and the title report came back with no issues related to it.
Okay. What if there's a problem with the, oh well.
If there was a problem, then we could restrict their access to get into their property, just like they'd restrict ours to get out.
Ben?
I'm wishing I had walked down there today. Can you walk down to the river easily or not easily from this parking lot?
You know, from the parking lot, well, it's fairly flat. Sorry, tongue-tied. And then there's about a 5 or so foot drop, I think, fairly edged off to kind of towards the river there. I don't have the topo in front of me exactly what the height is. I've walked and biked along there before, and it's not where I want to necessarily climb down. It's a little bit of a slippery slope, but it's not 10 or 15 feet there that drops off. So it's actually fairly good. And then, of course, kind of a green grassy place on the other side. There's not a lot of access.
I mean, the community benefit on this is predicated on people getting their kayaks to and from the river from this location, really.
Well, you know, there's a lot of different uses for different parks, you know, and I think people come down and it's a nice big flat bench area. You know, you've got an extension of the bike path right now. Certainly you'd be able to, like I said, I've dealt with a lot steeper, more difficult dock spots to get up in and out. Right now it's probably about 6 inches from where the top of the water is. So, you know, the water will move up and down accordingly. And if you've looked at the other dock areas along the river in those areas, you've got a floating dock with a sloped angle to it, and that would be able to access it fairly easily related to that. So I don't think it'd be too much of a concern from a design standpoint.
Any other questions for Aaron at this point? All right, Rebecca, one more.
So no short-term rentals at this site?
Correct, no, we're not, the WBT doesn't, B2 does not allow it, we're not asking for it.
Okay. And no affordable housing or on-site staff housing at all either, though?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing else for Aaron at this time. Any other member of the development or applicant wants to speak to us at this time? Monty, it looks like you do.
Yeah, I think Monte will. I don't know if there's any civil questions related to that, but otherwise I'll turn over to Monty.
Thanks. Monty, I think you have the floor.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time tonight. And yeah, I wish I could be there, but go 2.5 years without getting COVID, and all of a sudden I get it. So sorry about that. But I guess, you know, Aaron and Doug, they got it handled. And I think, you know, there's a lot of positive feedback from the city so far with the staff report recommending approval and the planning board and unanimous approval. And one area that I just want to provide a little more feedback on is actually two areas. One is the dock. I mean, you know, with the acre on the river that's being given to the city, if this gets approved, you know, there's all sorts of areas along there. I've walked that property a lot to put a dock. You know, there's the area that we're proposing, this private dock, is no better or worse than any of the areas along the acre of park to put a dock. You know, there's kind of little inlets where it'd be shallower to put a dock, and then there's kind of the right on the end of the bluff there where it would be, you know, I'm sure fine to put a dock there too. So, I mean, it'd almost be like a no-brainer to put a dock somewhere along that 1 acre of river frontage. So, I just wanted to provide that little bit of feedback. Of course, I'm no engineer or anything like that, but walking it and seeing the other docks along the river, I think there's plenty of space on the 1 acre to provide a dock. But the other component, I guess, is this parking thing. And just, you know, Aaron provided a little bit of background about this project and the history and that piece of land and the history of that. I guess what I would like to say is that, you know, part of this process of us ending up right here was me coming to the city, you know, probably about a year ago and saying, hey, you know, we should go together and buy this parcel because you guys kind of could have a park and you could clean up all your sewer easement issues and the bike trail issue, and I could use it for parking. I attempted to work a deal kind of with the city where we both participated in the purchase. And that didn't happen, and I understand why. You know, the city wouldn't want to own property and then have a conflict, and we're presenting a PUD and all that. I get all that, but I did try to make that happen, and it didn't, which is fine. So, you know, I did close on that property just 2 weeks ago or a week ago before, you know, I even have an approved PUD. So I'm kind of taking a risk, but that risk is real. You know, like I took on some pretty significant debt. I'm not a billionaire. I'm a regular kind of local real estate agent. And so it took on some pretty good debt to buy that piece and make this whole plan possible. And I think, you know, for that reason, you know, I think we should decide how many spots we get, because it does cost a lot of money to build a parking lot and engineer a parking lot and, you know, make it happen as part of this PUD. And that's real money that, you know, I'll be spending. And so therefore, in my opinion, you know, I think we deserve those spots because we don't know the future of that building. Maybe, you know, I'm sure it'll be a real estate office for quite a while, but someday it may not be. And, you know, if I'm paying to put all those spots in there, I think, you know, we should get the spots that we need for now and even in the future. And if the city wants more spots, you know, they can expand the parking lot into the setbacks a little bit or something, you know, like they could do on their own property, which is 1 acre on the river. So I guess that's just my feelings on it. And, you know, it may or may not have much value to you guys, but to me, it's real money that's being outlaid. And real money that if this gets approved and actually move forward with this whole thing, that I'll need to spend to build a parking lot like that. And I would appreciate some consideration of all that, I guess. But other than that, I think everybody's doing an awesome job there tonight. And like I said, I really appreciate the staff and Aaron and Doug, and I wish I was there in person. But other than that, thank you all, council, and appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks, Monty. Anybody else from the development or application team wish to speak tonight? Seeing nobody rise, I'm going to open up the rest of the public hearing. Is there any other member of the public that wishes in this hall that wishes to speak of this? I'll get to online in a moment. Rhonda.
Good evening, Council. Rhonda Fitzgerald, 412 Lupfer Avenue. Bruce Booty and I submitted a public comment with a sketch this at noon. I'm sorry it took so long. I thought today was a holiday, actually. And I hope that you all had a chance to look at it. And what Bruce's sketch proposes is that the grassy boulevard with street trees and protected sidewalk that are existing now further north be continued on this property, which is 2 city blocks. It goes from 6th to 8th Street. And that happens to be a stretch that is walked a lot, especially by the guests from the motels and hotels further south. And we do want those visitors to walk downtown and not drive. But that 2-block section is pretty pedestrian unfriendly. It's right against the drive lane, and in the bad weather, snow and ice are on it. The snow plow throws the snow on it. If it's raining, you get really wet from the cars and trucks. And it's right against the traffic. So it is not at all what we would call pedestrian friendly. And I am certain that the community has all come together to convey that we want to become a pedestrian-friendly community, and that whenever we have the opportunity, we want to enhance the facilities that we have for people to walk. And this project, although a PUD does require streetscape, doesn't address it at all. And finding 6, actually, it kind of says it does, which is bizarre because it absolutely doesn't. And that's a requirement of a PUD. So we're hoping that you would make an additional condition that they do provide or work out, let's say, attractive, high-quality streetscape with landscaping, sidewalks, street trees, high-quality street lighting fixtures, because that is a requirement for the planned unit development. It's under Chapter 2B, number 6. Also, the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan, which took 2.5 or 3 years to develop. This is the northernmost piece of Segment A. Segment A was identified as very much in need of enhancing the pedestrian environment. And all through the corridor plan, it calls for that. And when you get that improvement is when there is a development. So it says in the vision for Segment A, the corridor will be pedestrian and bike friendly while maintaining efficient traffic flows. The urban tree canopy will be maintained and expanded where lacking. Under transportation issues, pedestrian sidewalks are narrow and not separated from highway traffic on Spokane Avenue. Boulevard landscaping and canopy street trees are discontinuous or absent in certain stretches of Spokane Avenue. That would be this stretch. And under opportunity, page 54, number 2, under transportation, accommodate wider sidewalks while retaining and adding more canopy street trees and landscaping. So your corridor plan calls for this section to be improved, and your PUD requires that a streetscape be provided. And so it seems to Bruce and myself that It would not be that difficult to do that here, work out an agreement between the city, the MDT, and the developer, because there is room to do it. The grade only drops away, apparently, I'm not a landscape architect, but Bruce told me that it only drops about a foot or two, that you could get the boulevard, street trees, and the sidewalk with just, improving about a foot or two of drop. And that does seem quite reasonable, and I hope that you would ask for that. Now, that section is right now very unattractive, but starting at 8th, Dick Gordon did develop the 2 blocks that used to be the used car lot, and he has a grassy boulevard, street trees, and sidewalk on the other side of the street. So this is not an impossible thing to do. And I do think 2 blocks of your street are important. And this is your opportunity because it's through development that you get these improvements. In the comment that we submitted, I showed you some pictures on the first page. The first one is walking down the sidewalk going south, very pleasant. That's the 500 block. At the end of that block is 6th Street. The picture right next to it is approaching that intersection. You'll see the boulevard ends. There's pavement, there's asphalt across the street. The pedestrian is like, oh, what happened to the sidewalk? Where am I supposed to go? But that could be continuous if you guys required it. And I'm hoping that you will, because other developers, Dick Gordon specifically, have tackled that. The used car lot on the other side of the street was very unattractive, you'll remember. Maybe you don't remember, but I do. And so this is your opportunity, and I hope that you will take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhonda. Any other member of the public here in the hall wish to speak to us? Michelle, anybody online?
Mary Flowers, if you'd like to unmute your mic and speak your name and address, please.
Good evening again. Mary Flowers, Citizens for Better, Flathead. I would like to just support the comments that Bruce and Rhonda just spoke to. And I guess just to reiterate, I did not understand the staff comments that somehow there was an inability, and maybe I misunderstood, but their suggestion that this was difficult to require. As someone who's spent years of time in meetings on the Highway Corridor Plan, I think this is a very high expectation of the public that devoted hours to that plan to see this kind of streetscape with the added trees boulevard, and that this clearly needs to be a condition of this development moving forward. And you do have comments from us in your packet. We do have concerns about the scale of this building, and again, the process with architectural design, where the public, that comes after your approval, and with the public not really understanding how this can be made more compatible with the neighborhood at this point, I think is a problem. And I would encourage you to add a condition that really looks for some solution to the scale of this particular building. I do support the staff's recommendation that 10 to 12 parking spaces be set aside for this park area. And I'm wondering if there needs to be condition on the parking spaces. I think I'm correct in saying this is a non-motorized section of the river access, but that this would not accommodate boat trailers and large RVs, etc., so that this parking space has some conditions to address making it most accommodating to the public and recognizing the limitations of this space. Also would ask that the permit that allows this to, that would allow this to access at the, with the joint hotel easement, I think that easement needs to be part of this application in agreement with the city. I'm concerned that that's putting a lot of potential traffic on that access point, and I'm not sure that that doesn't need to be re-examined by folks like yourselves and staff that have more expertise in that. But I just raised the issue of the traffic conflict with the popularity that this site may have for the public, as well as those residing in or working at that building, whether or not traffic can be somehow routed back onto 6 rather than onto 93. I didn't get a chance to look closely at the application as I would like. I wasn't clear that the property with the park and in addition to the former rig property has been purchased and is part of the record of the application here. If not, a condition for property purchase would need to be solidified. And I think that's it. I really think this needs careful thought on your part, and particularly the landscaping, and really setting the precedent of that even as we add small pieces of redevelopment to this corridor, that all of them are going to be required to comply with the standards, both of your PDUD regulations and the highway corridor plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Any other public comment tonight online? Did you see any?
No, I don't see anything.
Okay. One moment, I'll try to, this is a little out of order. Giuseppe, you had a question? For whom? We're not a back and forth with general public comment. If you want to talk to the applicant, that's fine. But that's not the role we play here. Aaron, you had something else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just want to kind of follow up with our thought process on this public corridor and the streetscape along there. It's something that we truthfully haven't gone into in much depth on this. It seemed secondary to kind of the overall process. But in the discussion, what we've kind of seen going on today, we're happy to engage with the state and try to meet as much as we can of the scenic corridor and the public requirements. What we're concerned about is conditioned to do something that isn't on our property. That's the MDT might come back and say, nah, you can't do that. And then we're conditioned to do it as part of the proposal or approval. So having a condition to sit there and say, hey, we get to meet with MDT, work with the city and work with MDT and the developer to come up with a solution that everybody's happy with, great, no problem. I just don't want to get conditioned to meet some requirement that is in conflict with somebody else. So that's our big concern here related to this. And I don't know what that solution is. We are just not versed enough into knowing what MDT is looking for that versus how the scenic corridor plays into it. And dealing with them before, if they're all agreement with us, great. If not, that's our concern, that we get held to two standards. And we kind of ran into that in a few other projects along the river and stuff like that. So I think that's why the condition was working with the other agencies related to the pathway and stuff along the rivers, because we've had two different conflicting agreements there, and that's how they've worded it. So something similar to this for the highway part would be great, fine, too.
Thanks, Aaron. Given the way this has gone, any further questions for staff or the applicant from the dais? Rebecca? Yep.
one is for Maria, and is it possible that we would be able to use cash and lieu fees to help build this parking lot, or is that already, do we have any funds that could help build this park that we're gonna possibly be getting?
We have a 5-year capital improvement plan with multiple projects that aren't even on the 5-year capital improvement plan. The park board makes the priority list. We could run that by them. Not for the parking lot, but for the park. Is that what you mean?
No, I was specifically talking about the parking lot, but you just answered what I was,
Okay.
you have a lot of other priorities before this one, yeah.
Correct. yeah.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a question for Wendy, is this the maximum number of parking spaces that they can build down there? Is 12 on each side?
You know, I don't know. We haven't, this is just the design that they provided to us. We said, why don't you make sure you see how much you can get on there. I mean, maybe they could build more. I don't know if they've looked. You don't think so? No.
No, okay.
No. And I would say too, just to attack on what you were asking, Maria, the developer is gonna build the parking lot and the drive aisle and the parking spaces. The city's not gonna build it.
Okay, I know sometimes I'm too nice about all this stuff, but if, I just was thinking if we had extra money, but I understand. And then, the maintenance of the sidewalk in the winter for snow and ice is a requirement of the owner of this property then, along Highway 93 and 6th as well. Do we need to condition that? No, okay, thank you.
Steve, and then Giuseppe.
Maria, have you walked this property? I'm sure you have been out there.
I have, but not recently.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is your assessment of being able to get of the ability to create a path and an access to the water?
Well, in looking at an aerial of it, it looks like there's already a footpath down to the river. So I don't know what that grade is and how accessible that is, but if people are already creating a footpath, they're already trying to access it. So it may just be that you have to gradually approach as opposed to a straight down to a dock.
Okay. I mean, those two things are, what people have done in the past versus what the city would be required to do are vastly different things. And that's my concern, is that we would take on this property as a park without being able to actually access the river from it.
Right. So, and the reason that I mentioned looking at it from an aerial view, typically we find the easiest access, people find the easiest access point. If there's already a footpath, it's likely that it's fairly accessible. I just don't know exactly what that grade is, so I can't give you a definitive as if it would meet an ADA accessible grade or not, but it does seem to be that people are accessing it in that way. There's lots of things that you can do, but it does require permitting as well, and so then you have to go through the permitting process to know for sure that you can do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Giuseppe, you have any questions?
No, Deputy Mayor, only if you're ready to accept the motion either ways.
I've got a couple of questions, but then I will. Maria, you went to one of my overall questions here. It's very nice to be donated a park. It's very nice to be donated the concept that we can put a dock down there. And then the other, we're going to require, if we were going to do that, we would be required to get permits from
124.
Fish, Wildlife,
don't you remember?
A 124 permit,
Right.
yes.
And that's not a guarantee here, correct?
That's correct.
And yet for example, if the development were to take place, we get the park, they put in their dock, would a dock within that proximity to our proposed dock be an inhibition to our being able to put one down there on the city?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
No.
They're not concerned with densities or how close they are to one another?
Not that I have ever seen or been told of. I think as you paddle the river, you can see that there are docks within
Yes.
close distance of one another.
We've seen changes in attitude from FDBP and Conservation District. That's why I'm
I think docks are a lot easier to get permitted than hardscape leading down to the river.
Okay. And then the another question, a related question, it's to some degree Monty's reference is like, if the city wants more parking spaces, why don't you create them? Maybe that's a fair question. My question is, given what we know of the topography over there, and where the setbacks are, contrary to at least Monty's reference earlier, we as a city don't generally go into setbacks and exempt ourselves from those kinds of requirements. Is there room in the space that would otherwise be provided for us to add more parking if we wanted an additional 6 in that area?
Staff hasn't really evaluated that, but it is a tight building lot. I'd probably defer to Craig on that I don't know if he's looked at it in that respect either, or if Wendy or Dave have.
I mean, I think that they would have to be designed together. You couldn't just stack 6 more spaces on those 12, because you have to consider drive aisles and all that stuff.
Say that again, Dave.
So they'd have to be considered together with the 12 that are there. I mean, using the same drive aisle, you couldn't just add a second layer of parking on the outside of that without significantly going into the water quality setback.
Well, that is my point, David. Is there room there to design for that, regardless of whether they build it now or we build it later?
We haven't evaluated that. We just evaluated the proposal that they have. But I mean, there's a steep slope heading up on one side up to the side of the highway.
Yep.
And the rest of it, goes into the floodplain, which, you can develop in a floodplain, you can develop in a water quality setback, but you either have to get a deviation through a PUD or do buffer averaging. So, and obviously this provides an opportunity that you guys could put a condition on there that, if the city wanted to add more parking, that they could deviate from that. But we'd have to evaluate the environmental impacts of that.
If the council were so inclined, would a condition to the effect of that the design needs to be revised to be able to provide, that they will provide the 6 immediately, but it will be designed in such a way that if at some point in the future the city wants to fund an additional 6 parking places down there, it's already set up and designed for that add?
I mean, it's a little difficult if they own the parking lot and they're just giving us an easement for 6 spaces or however many spaces. If we're going to add on to that, I mean, there's just complication based on the ownership, what they're using it for. We would have to take out some of their spaces to build in a secondary drive aisle, probably to come further into the setback. When they originally came to site review, they had shown only parking on the highway side of the drive aisle. So just like, I think it was only 8 or 10 spaces at the beginning. And we actually suggested, well, if we could go onto the, parking on the other side for the park, and then we can go into the water quality setback, because it was going to be public parking spaces to be able to access that park. So that was the whole reason that, we even started talking about expanding that into 2 different sides of parking on that, was to provide public access. I mean, personally, I'd rather see just those, 12 spaces for the city without having to mess around with that, trying to add more spaces in there, because it'd be very difficult without taking up a bunch of that area that would be the park for parking. It'd be basically a parking lot.
Yes, Wendy, go ahead.
I would also add that the parking for Kitty Park is so close to this. It is just at the top of the hill and around the corner, and there is, quite a bit of on-street parking. I don't know if Maria, do you know how many parking spaces that is? It's quite a bit though, but there's, half a block away there is on-street parking.
Right. Not to beat a dead horse, but we do know that in fact that the Kitty Park does get a lot of use, and it gets a lot of parking around there. And so the fact that it's there and it's otherwise occupied doesn't really give you an opportunity to use that to access this particular, if we get this park. And that's what that was my,
and
I
the
appreciate
other
that.
side of Central Avenue also has, across from Kitty Park, there is on-street parking there as well, so.
Okay, all right. Well, thanks for clarifying that. I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other Ben?
Good, just one. Maria, if this council was to table this application for 1 or 2 meetings, would it be a lot to ask if you and or the park board could do some visioning for this park to assess what benefit it would do for the community, or how it would look, I guess, and to include a dock and access in those questions.
I suppose it depends on to what level of design you're asking. If you are asking for just like a verbal concept of how do we want to use it, we want to get down to the river, and we want to have a couple of picnic tables, I can tell you that's probably what they are envisioning already. If you want more of a design concept drawn out, we would have to designate funds to that, and that would take a little bit of time to go through that process.
Okay, thank you.
And just to go to a next obvious question, David, are we under any time constraints in terms of approving this or not? Okay, thanks. I'll answer that question before we get, pardon me, sir?
PUDs don't have time constraints? Oh, okay, sorry.
Correct.
There we go.
Correct.
Thank you. I would now turn it back to council for a motion and discussion.
Mr. Deputy Mayor, I move to approve WPUD 22-10, the finding of fact in the staff report and 16 conditions of approval as recommended by the Whitefish Planning Board unanimously on May 19, 2022.
I'll second.
Any further discussion?
Yes, I'd like to comment on my own motion. Again, we're sitting here in quasi-judicial capacity. The rules of engagements are the city code, the gatekeepers are the city staff, and then there is a planning board. Again, they came to recommend it. Planning board voted unanimously, and that's the reason why I'm going for this motion.
Dave?
I'd like to make a friendly amendment, if possible.
Please.
I would like to require that that there would be 12 parking spots instead of 6 given to the city.
Would you like to speak to your motion?
Well, I think that we're taking on a potential park here that we may not have great access to the river, and if we're going to go forward with this, I think we need the parking there. You know, and the other part is that, you know, this is a PUD. This is a significant public benefit. We have denied PUDs with significantly less public benefit than this, and I don't think it's too much to ask to have one side of that two-sided parking lot to just be dedicated to the city. If that interferes with future options in this building, then that's a decision for the applicant to make, whether their project still makes sense at that point. But I don't see it as an overall too much to ask to add 6 more spaces.
Andy?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm going to support the motion because I agree with the 12 spots, and I think they don't need them currently, which is exactly what they've said. And I think we'll see what kind of use we are, and that's something that we could obviously look at in the future possibly. If they come back to us and go, hey, we want to do something else and we need more parking, then there's obviously some other options there. Wendy's right, there's a lot of on-street parking very, very close today for a commercial use, which would be accessed from 6th in all likelihood. What I would ask of the maker of the motion in the second also, if we would consider the reverse angle concept that the planning director presented to us. I think the way this is going to function, that would probably work a lot better. It's a one-way, and for people having to come in and turn like this to get in and then back all the way out. But if we had a reverse angle back in, particularly for access to the river, because people are going to be unloading boats there, so they're going to pull in, they're going to back in, then it's a simple line of sight for them to go out. And so I would request of both the maker and the second if that would be a possibility.
I agree to that.
Any further discussion on the friendly amendment?
Yes. I thought that the compromise of 6 parking spots designated to the ownership and 6 floating parking spot was a reasonable compromise. So I understand the friendly amendment forces those 12 parking spots on one side and 12 on the other side. I would have rather seen, given the seasonality, to have a 6 floating parking space not designated, but I didn't, at this point, it's not part of the motion. Am I correct?
Rebecca?
I'd like to add that we put them, that it's in the condition that it's on the west side of the parking lot, so people that are. Riverside, that might be better. Yeah, just so the public use is on the Riverside part of it. Is that okay? I mean.
I'll agree to that too, yeah, that's fine.
Right. Any further discussion on the friendly amendment? All those in favor, raise your right hand. All those opposed, like sign. And the motion passes 5-1 with Councilor Giuseppe, excuse me, I'm sorry. Kyle Tagliano. I've tried to work myself through that, and I'm sorry, Giuseppe. It's just like, anyway, so I'm sorry. So, in opposition, so that passes. We're now back to either additional friendly amendments or the motion. Yes, I know, but as part of the further discussion, okay, carry on. Rebecca, you have, let's take them one at a time.
Okay, the first one would be the one that Rhonda and Bruce Booty came up with. Street parking and pedestrian improvements on site and on both 6th Street and Spokane Avenue should conform to the guidelines in the Highway 93 South Corridor Study and should enhance the safety and aesthetics for pedestrians of all abilities in all seasons of use. These site improvements shall be addressed in detail in the architectural review site submittal.
Is there a second to the motion? I'll second.
Okay. And just to speak to this, I do appreciate, Aaron, that you're going to try to work through things with the DOT. I understand it might be difficult, but I do think the visioning of our community to have a beautiful entrance into the downtown area is important. So I think this will at least cover that intent, and then you can let us know if it's impossible, or I don't know how that will work, but thank you.
Steve?
Does your language include what Aaron said he would agree to, which is the language that he'll work with the entities involved to get to, because this is not a simple matter of them building that. They have to get the right permits from the DOT to do it.
Maybe we can ask Craig. I know Craig has said that we can't really tell the DOT what to do, but the DOT is actually doing improvements on Spokane in this area, but it's for ADA compliance, I think, Craig, right? So it's already on their radar, and we're already doing the water main improvements right in this area too. So at some point, we should be working with them anyways, correct?
Yeah, the state is, as part of their pavement preservation project, because they're using federal dollars, they're required to have all of the intersections in compliance with ADA standards. So they are rebuilding some of the curb ramps in this corridor. I can't tell you whether or not MDT is going to permit an encroachment permit for street trees and boulevard improvements in this area. What I can tell you is if they do approve it, they are going to require an MOU between the city of Whitefish and MDT to maintain those improvements. So just so long as you realize that your condition is requiring additional maintenance responsibilities for the city for that corridor, if it's improved by MDT.
Do you want us to change the language that I just spoke to say anything? Like to add in an MOU will be provided as needed?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. And memorandum of understanding will be provided between the DOT and the city of Whitefish as needed for maintenance. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, I think that gets it across.
Okay.
Wendy?
Sorry. Could you repeat it? I was writing as fast as I could, and I just couldn't quite keep up.
Yes, I'll try. Okay, do you want me to start from the top, or just? Okay. Street parking and pedestrian improvements on site and on both 6th Street and Spokane Avenue should conform to the guidelines in the Highway 93 South Corridor Study and should enhance the safety and aesthetics for pedestrians of all abilities in all seasons of use, period. These site improvements shall be addressed in detail in the architectural review site submittal, period. An MOU will be provided between the DOT and the city of Whitefish for maintenance.
So, Public Works is the one that reviews the engineering plans. I wasn't sure why, I mean, certainly a site plan is submitted to architectural review, but they don't review the engineering drawings.
I don't know what you're talking about, sorry.
That's what you said, something that it would be submitted to the architectural review committee?
Oh, memorandum of understanding will be provided between the DOT and the city of Whitefish for maintenance.
Before that sentence.
Oh, this is from Rhonda and Bruce. These site improvements shall be addressed in detail in the architectural review site submittal. Is that not relevant?
Certainly the architectural review committee does look at site plans, but they don't approve infrastructure improvements. That's, that stuff goes to the Public Works Department.
Okay.
Yeah, I
So
think
we'll take that out?
if you indicate those site improvements will be included in the engineering plans,
Okay.
that'd be fine.
Will be, do you want me to read it one more time? Since it's on the table. I probably
Rebecca,
better.
could you read the part about the MOU? Because I don't think that we can require the applicant to get an MOU between MDT and the city. I think that's going to be subject to MDT approval maybe. And just to make it clear, while the MOU states we do maintain, you know, it falls to the city to maintain, we require all property owners to maintain their right-of-way, including sidewalk improvements and those type of things. So that cost is passed on to those property owners. I want to make that clear for those because we do have these agreements in place in some areas along Highway 93. I just don't want everyone to think that all of a sudden that maintenance responsibility falls to the city if we execute one of these MOUs. So I would say that that sentence, you're going to have to, we should work on it because I think it should be, you know, subject to MDT approval or something like that, or if, because you'll deny the entire project if MDT doesn't approve that, basically. So you can either do it subject to MDT approval or leave it without the MOU discussed, and then it's up to them to come back.
Maybe that would be easier, Angie.
Yeah, I would just caution against conditioning something on negotiating something with MDT. I mean, it's great if MDT, you know, wants to negotiate, but I don't think that we can basically force them to negotiate an agreement with, pardon me, MDT that MDT may not want.
And we already have maintenance standards for the area anyways. Okay, so finally, just to read it one more time, street parking and pedestrian improvements on site and on both 6th and Spokane Avenue should conform to the guidelines in the Highway 93 South Corridor Study and should enhance the safety and aesthetics for pedestrians of all abilities in all seasons of use, period. These site improvements will be included in the engineering approval or engineering
Plans.
Okay. And that's it.
Rebecca, might I have a point of clarification?
Please.
This is difficult to legislate from here, and that's why it's hard. Craig, is it fair for, I think the intent here, and the mover can correct me, is to require of the developer to pursue with all due diligence enacting the street improvements and sidewalk improvements and boulevard improvements that we would otherwise require under the Highway 93 South Corridor Plan. Is that correct? So, with that said, and Wendy, I'd like your input here, and Angie or anybody, that's fine. Now, I think we all understand that if MDT says, no, this project might ought to have an opportunity to go forward anyway. Is that correct? Okay. So how do we require, because I think Aaron would probably like the opportunity to have some force of encouragement from us to go to MDT and say, look, they really want this and they're really requiring it, and I'd really like to get this thing done. What, can you help me out here? How do we word this so that it gives him the direction he might otherwise need and the support of the city in pursuing that, and get this, and yet at the same time, not kill this whole deal if MDT just throws up their hands and says, no way?
I think if council trusts me to enforce that the applicant is using all due diligence, then that language makes perfect sense. I can work with the applicant and with MDT to ensure that all due diligence is being used to obtain an encroachment permit from MDT. I just can't guarantee it. I agree that there are improvements across the street that may look similar to what it is we're looking to see here.
Right.
But those were done probably a decade ago, and MDT has worked really hard over the last 10 years to try and reduce encroachments in their right-of-way.
Okay.
And so they have all sorts of new policies, and these MOUs are one of the tools they use, so.
No, and I understand that. Rebecca, are you happy with my articulation of your motion and how it's conditioned?
I think it sounded much better.
Oh.
Yeah, please, let's take it.
No, okay, well,
Who
thank you.
wrote it down?
Is that,
Anybody?
is that okay with the second?
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to suggest. Thank you.
Okay. With that said, any further comments on this friendly amendment?
Point of order, sir. I thought you seconded the motion.
Oh, then I did, yes. Then
So
I-
is it
I-
okay
I
with
certainly-
yourself?
I certainly accept my own
Perfect.
second and change it to it. I did too, so that's why, anyway. So I think I know at least. Any other points you wish to make, Giuseppe?
Yes, I'm against this proposed amendment. I wouldn't call it a friendly one. And we're putting the burden of doing the work, doing the investment, taking the risk on the developer. We're sitting here ruling from this bench, and we do not know where the economy is going. I think they went through the motions. I think the 12 parking lots was a point of discussion, but this really radically puts a high risk on their viability of the project. For that reason, I'm going to vote against it.
So that's fine, Giuseppe. I just want to clarify for you that if, for any reason, MDT does not approve this, and he can't get that approved through them, and Craig will confirm this for us, that does not prohibit him from proceeding with this thing. So his risk on this is zippo. All he's required to do is do the due diligence and pursue this matter with the help of the city. And so again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I want you to understand, we are not requiring any more risk from him on this project other than doing what he said he would do. I just want to clarify that. Okay?
Frank, could I just clarify? If the MDT agrees that they're going to allow the encroachment permit, we are expecting the developer to
Yes.
do those
Correct.
improvements.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that's what the condition was. With that said, all those in favor of this friendly amendment, raise your hand. All those opposed, like sign. Again, 4-1. Councilor Caltabiano voting against. Any other matters on this, or can we go back to the original motion? Okay, Rebecca?
I'm a little concerned about us not having proof about the way the south entrance or exit is going to be done. Is staff concerned about that at all, about us not having any legal
Condition number 7 requires them to obtain an encroachment permit from MDT to access onto Spokane Avenue. This is the comment we received from MDT when we sent
Okay.
out the application. So they, and then
So-
all improvements within the right-of-way, they need to get a permit from MDT. It is a state highway, they're the ones who improve it.
Okay, thank you,
Yep.
Wendy. Nope, I guess that's it for me.
Okay, great. Any further discussion on the original motion?
I'm just gonna make a couple quick comments.
Sure.
I think I've heard concern up here about, well, can we get down to the river, or is this abuse? I can tell you, having sat on the real estate committee, and I can tell you from having been involved with bike paths, this piece of property has been one the city has wanted to own for literally decades. Decades. And I think there's a very clear public benefit here, and I think for us to forsake that opportunity right now, quite frankly, would be foolish on our part. We had looked, and Dana will confirm this, we had looked at literally spending over $1 million in TIF dollars of city funds just to buy this piece of property. It provides a huge benefit for access to the river for us, and challenge may be there to get a dock in and get good access, but I look at other places that we access the river throughout the city, and we can make that happen. I think Maria would shake her head and agree with me on that. I think that's an important thing to realize. The other reason that we really always wanted to obtain this piece of property was because of the sewer easement we have through there. And Craig, and that's one of the other prime drivers, is we have a big chunk of sewer pipe that goes through there that we never really had great access to. And I mean, we started working on buying this piece of property when Phil Rigg was alive, when Char's husband was still alive, and I think Phil passed away over 20 years ago. So there may be some things that we're not super comfortable with in terms of building size or massing or all those kinds of things, but at the end of the day, it also does have to be financially feasible. And I think that is important for us to recognize. And I'm super comfortable with what we did with the MDT part. I have a little apprehension about that because we don't really know what's gonna happen on the highway yet. I mean, that's the other, I would hate to see them go through and say the state suddenly go, oh yeah, go ahead and put that all in, and then in 4 or 5 years, or hopefully sometime in my lifetime, we actually get Spokane rebuilt and they come through and do something totally different. We don't know what that solution is ultimately gonna be in the next 10 years. So I'm a little concerned about that, but I did support it because I think there is an out for them, and Aaron was like, yeah, we're willing to at least talk to them and work with them and see what we can come up with. And because they said that, I was more than comfortable to go ahead and support that. But other than that, I think this is a great opportunity, and I'm pretty happy that we're gonna ultimately get this piece of property, and I think it will be a super valuable addition to our park and river access.
Thanks. Any other comments? Seeing none, all those in favor of the motion, all those opposed, like sign. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Next we have, yes, we're going to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll be back. We'll be back on at 9:35. Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to call this city council meeting back to order after our short break. And with this, I'm going to deviate from our agenda currently. Yes, my mic is on. Am I on? Jake? One moment. I can hear myself just fine. I was being motioned. Excuse me, technical difficulties. We're going to deviate from our current agenda to allow Justine from Fish, Wildlife, and Parks to come up and give us an update on the bear activity. Come on, Justine.
Thank you. Sorry about that I didn't speak earlier. But I talked to Rebecca this weekend. She was having a bear crisis. So I wanted to take this time to just introduce myself. Some of you know me, some of you don't. I'm Justine Valiers. I am the new bear and mountain lion conflict specialist for this area for Fish, Wildlife, and Parks. I cover up to Eureka, down to Whitefish, Columbia Falls, and then up to Marias Pass in the North Fork. So for future reference, if you're having bear and lion conflicts, you'll be in touch with me. The last 30 years it's been Eric Wenham, but we're dividing the region now and he's covering the southern half. So I also wanted to talk to you guys because I know there's been a lot of pushback on the bear resistant containers in regards to some people saying that there are no bear problems or minimal bear problems. Why are we doing this? And as someone who's been putting in a lot of hours lately, it's very much a problem, as you know. But just wanted to give you a little update that since May 1st, I've had 191 conflict calls in my area. And today I hit 99 calls from Whitefish alone since May 1st, with just black bear calls and a handful of mountain lion calls. But 99 conflict calls from Whitefish alone since May 1st. Black bears getting into garbage, mostly. Bird feeders, black bears unafraid, habituated, people very concerned, demanding that I bring traps out. And then I've actually had a couple people say that they were charged by black bears, they did spray them. So this stuff is very much a problem. So I just want to also take the time to thank you for going forward with the bear resistant containers. This has been a long time coming. So from FWP, we're very very excited, looking forward to them being on the ground. I know there's logistics and things need sorted, but I'm hoping that we can definitely find a way with that because even despite the cans being rolled out, we're still going to have conflicts. There's still going to be the calls. There's still going to be bears, but I'm really hoping it's going to help mitigate these conflicts, and it should. I actually got a video yesterday from someone in Whitefish, and I posted it on my Flathead Bearware page if you want to check it out. But it's of a black bear going up to a bear-resistant container. He's trying to get in, trying to work it. He can't, and then he goes right next door to the other neighbor's can, and it's not bear-resistant, and he gets in, and you see him eating garbage. So I do have faith, and so again, thank you for finally pushing through. And yeah, you'll probably see me in town. I've been paintballing bears and hazing bears out of garbage cans and up in trees, drugging them, pulling them out of trees. So I have been busy. And then I just printed out a little map for you guys so you can see one of our collared grizzlies. He was collared for conflict. I actually caught him 2 years ago just off of East Edgewood, killing pigs. But last time Eric and I were here, Eric had mentioned there had been a big male that came through town, and so I just printed out his locations so you can see them. He goes right through town, and he spends a lot of time in and around Whitefish, and that's just one that we know of. And last year I caught a little female grizzly getting into chicken coops just off of West 7th, across from the post office. So they're here, they're busy, as am I, but I just, again, thank you so much for finally coming through with this. And I'll just
Yeah. Jessica,
Justine.
Justine, excuse me, Justine. One of our counselors
I
has
just
a
have a
question
quick question for you.
If Go ahead.
Do you have an online map that we can kind of see this information? Or-
No, that stuff, yeah, we don't put that stuff public. But I can always make these kind of screenshots and send them. I think I actually gave Craig Workman, a couple of them too,
Okay.
the same one.
But you do maintain a database of bear sightings and bear incidents and those kind of things?
So,
Somebody does?
every year we do our annual reports, so we'll put out information in that. But there's no database where we're like, with black bears, for instance, where I'm marking like where we got calls. I can make something up of that, but the grizzly bear GPS locations are private.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks.
So we will move on now to our next public hearing, which is our resolution 22-12, a resolution adopting fees for solid waste disposal services. Speaking of bears.
Well, I feel like most of my staff report's already been given, so we'll just move on to the financials. I think actually I will be brief if you don't mind, because you guys have
Please.
heard this
Please.
on a couple of occasions. The full staff report, just for the record, starts on page 176 of your packet. So we definitely have been working with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and Republic Services on this for quite some time. At a city council work session back in March, staff was directed to proceed with negotiating an amendment to our current contract with Republic Services to include animal-resistant containers. And then in a resolution 22-09 that was approved last month, we did amend that agreement. So we've included a copy of the amended agreement in the staff report, which does include a single 95-gallon animal-resistant container for all residential current residential containers with no purchase or delivery fees. The term of the contract is 10 years with an annual rate increase of 3.25%. So we know that Republic Services originally contended that individual containers will have to be serviced curbside, primarily due to logistics and the limitations of our alleys. We also know that we received considerable public resistance from this. The primary contention, of course, being that those that do not have street-side driveways will have considerable problems getting their containers out to the curb, especially during the winter. I think there's also very legitimate concerns about parking, preventing Republic from being able to provide curbside service. So, since our last staff meeting, I was able to meet with Republic Services. We looked at alley conditions throughout town. And I will say that Republic drivers do currently have quite a few challenges to deal with, even with the 300-gallon containers. And so if we multiply that number by at least 4, it's definitely going to get more difficult for them. But all that said, Republic does acknowledge the public pressure that we're under to maintain alley service, and they are willing to work with us to maintain alley service for customers that are currently provided alley service. So going forward, we know that it's going to take a very strict set of guidelines. I've already begun working with Republic Services on those guidelines, and there's going to be a fairly robust educational campaign to make sure that we can maintain alley service. So in terms of rates, you were provided for the resolution the basic rates. Since then, we have finalized those, and they are in the full staff report. The increased monthly residential fees will be $6.47 for a total residential bill of $17.25 per month. Although this will increase revenues by about $306,000 for the first year, only $24,000 of that is going to be retained by the city to increase or to support increased costs for administrative services, and the rest goes to Republic Services. So Based on all the information collected to date, we do recommend that a public hearing be held to consider the enclosed resolution adopting fees for solid waste disposal. That concludes my report.
Steve?
At the risk of making a long meeting longer, I'd like you to repeat what you just said, please, because about the money, the $1.50 administration fee, and what the revenue increase does and where that goes and why.
So the $1.50 increase in administrative fee goes to support increasing cost of administrative services, mostly labor.
And to clarify, Steve, we haven't raised rates for 2 years for garbage services, and Republic has passed on a 3% raise each year. They've eaten into our administrative costs that we originally had at the beginning of the contract. So what we are doing is we're recouping that loss, but as the city's facing wage pressures and so forth, we'll get into the budget here soon. That's to also pay for not only wages, but the garbage has increasing costs for postage and mailing that we're seeing, as well as like software increases for using utility billing software. So as a percentage, we're going from $1 to $1.50 per month at this point. Back in 2014, when we were billing originally, or maybe, 2014, 15, we actually had a $2 administration fee. So we are still not up to our administration fee back to going from city to Republic back to us, so.
I understand that, but you said only $24,000 goes to the city for our costs, for the employee that has to do the work?
Yeah, so the additional 50 cents per account, we estimated it at $24,000 that we would retain for our costs. Now, keep in mind, these employees also are also billing for water and sewer, so they're split among 3 different utilities. So the increase in pay and all those costs are shared.
Right, but why does the rest of it go to, what does the other $280,000 go to Republic for?
That's for the cost of their service. They said that the increased cost to provide bear-resistant containers was like $6 a month or $5.75 a month. So that is actually just the cost to service the contract we signed with Republic Services.
Okay. I just don't, when we originally looked at this, the number was $15.75, which is already a significant increase. And I'm just trying to be, not everybody can just say, oh, it's only $18 a year.
We actually...
Well, just for the administrative fee. And I get it. We're not at where we were 7 years ago or whatever, but we're also a lot more expensive on the other side, on the service side of it than we were. And it's not just that easy for people to say, oh, well, I can manage that. Especially when our total cost is going up 60% per year, and then it's going to go up another 3.5% every year after that.
I understand that, but when we did present it to council, we made sure to say that did not include the administrative fee, and that was on all the documentation we provided because we didn't know where that administrative fee increase would go. I will say, as we get into the budget, which is the next public hearing, we're giving a $40 a year decrease in property taxes. So, if you want to look at what's being offset there, we looked at how increases in utility bills, aside from the bear cart going to the animal resistant, because that $5.75 was a council direction thing. Everything else is going to even itself out in a year.
Okay, I get it. I also know that we have 38% cash reserves, and I'm just trying to figure out a way that we could maybe soften the blow a little bit more for people, because it's easy for some people to absorb these costs, but it's not easy for everyone.
Thanks, Steve. Any other questions for staff? Please, I'd love a motion.
It is a public hearing.
Oh,
yes.
I'd like to open the public hearing at this, thank you, Craig. I'd like to open a public hearing at this time and ask for any public comment. Any online public comment, Michelle? Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for a motion from council.
All right, I'll try again. I will move to approve Resolution 22-12, a resolution adopting fees for solid waste disposal services.
Motion made and seconded. Do you want to speak to your motion?
We've already talked about this one quite enough.
Great. All those in favor? I just asked for some and you didn't. Oh, you're right. Giuseppe, what would you like to say?
Yes. I am not sold, and we talked about it, about the full package. I understand that Republic will commit to looking at collecting the garbage in the alleys, but it's a verbal commitment. And I would like to wait, and I know my vote is meaningless because there are 6 of us here, but I would like to make a point because I would have preferred the full package to be completed, parking.
All those in favor? All those opposed, like sign. Again, a motion passes 5-1 with Councilor Caltabiano voting in opposition. Thank you. Practice makes perfect. Now, on to our next public hearing, which is consideration of approving the city manager's proposed budget for fiscal year 23, the preliminary budget, and settling final public hearing on the capital improvement project and FY 23 final budget for August 15th, 2022. Dana.
All right, thank you. Good evening, and you have sat through multiple sessions discussing the budget. I do want to touch on a few highlights for those in attendance that might not have joined us during those work sessions, but I will be brief as this has been posted online since the middle of May. I didn't do anything. I don't know what that was. So fiscal year 23 is not a reappraisal year, so taxable value is going to be limited to growth in new construction or new additions on current properties. And it's very important to bring that up because many people are worried about their taxable values and where they're going to go this fiscal year. That is something that will limit our growth, and we're estimating it to be about 4% in our taxable value. We will not get those official numbers until the first Monday in May from the Department of Revenue. And at that time, we will rework what our mill levies will be because my crystal ball is only so good. Our budget right now proposes an overall reduction in mills of 8.413 mills, which is about a 5.36% decrease in property tax revenue. We're able to do this because resort tax this year for fiscal year 23 will result in an additional $1.16 million going back to property taxpayers, which is about a 70% increase. And that's due to the increased collections that we had during fiscal year 22. Again, those are estimates based on collections that we assume we will collect through June 30th of this year. So they are subject to change, but again, based on reasonable estimates. Cost of living, or excuse me, consumer price index that the city uses to account for changes in costs would be at 7.1% this year for fiscal year 23. And, you know, we took into consideration, obviously, the increasing costs that many people are facing with inflation, also knowing that we're in an uncertain economic time now. But we also need to take into consideration that we haven't raised our maintenance assessments for 2 years. With COVID, we kept all rates, utility rates and assessments flat, and actually provided decreases in millage as well. So we only have the street maintenance assessment and the parks and greenway maintenance assessments increasing by 4%. Commercial lighting, residential lighting, and stormwater maintenance assessments will remain flat for a third year. The estimated savings for a home with a Zillow market value of $916,000 right now today will be about $41.87. And obviously we will see some of that savings offset by future proposed increases in water and sewer rates based on our study, as well as the increase in the garbage service rates. Budgeted fund balance, we will still have a 38.91% fund balance by the end of the fiscal year. That's what we're projecting. We still are waiting, you know, on final cash balance figures at the end of fiscal year 22. Our year end ends here shortly in 10 days. So we'll be able to have those numbers, you know, about mid-July or so. That's really great, you know, considering we've been able to retain that. As many have you've witnessed, we are facing some serious inflationary pressures. The Fed's just increased interest rates, and it's pretty clear that, to me, that we will have an economic slowdown. That is the intention of the rate increases, is to curb inflation. So we will see what happens in the next coming year. But capital spending is going down. That fluctuates every year. We know we just completed 2 large water and wastewater treatment plant projects. And probably the other big item that everybody's always talks about is personnel. We are adding to our budget, both police, fire, parks and rec, human resources, and building inspector, code enforcement. So those are all new positions that we're looking to add or increase to more hours. And that will help with our growing demands on the city staff. We also are looking at retention and obviously wage adjustments. We're facing the same pressures as every other business out there, trying to remain competitive. Over the past couple of years, we've given modest increases of 4 to 3.5%, which did actually not keep up with our local jurisdictions in this valley. So we did fall behind. So the budget does propose a 5% cost of living adjustment and a 2% step on our wage matrix, which we view as longevity. We did complete negotiations with our Public Works Union last week. We are waiting for them to ratify the agreement that we reached. They would actually receive a 7.5% increase with a 5.5% COLA. They are the only employees at the city that missed out on a 0.5% increase. I think it was 2-3 years ago. So they are on their own wage matrix. By giving them the additional 0.5%, it catches them up with all other city employees from prior years and puts us back onto one wage matrix. So that also has its own benefits as we look at transitioning staff with payroll. But so we're waiting on that. But overall, those negotiations went very smoothly. So then with that, you know, I'm happy to answer any questions on the budget. I think that we've done a great job to address, you know, some of the challenges we see with upcoming economic concerns, that we are spending down some fund balance, like for fire, to accommodate equipment needs. That said, we might need to spend down more, because I'm hearing from the chief that fire trucks may be going up $200,000 from what we anticipated. We will see where that comes in at. We'll talk to council, but we're seeing that. They're still 2 years out, so probably won't even be able to purchase one within this budget. So I think we're all facing challenges of supply and demand and inflationary pressures. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Dana on her staff report? Seeing none. Oh, Rebecca.
Just wanted to thank you publicly, Dana, since we're also missing a finance director, for a really great job.
Great, thanks. May I entertain a motion?
Yes, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
It's a public
no.
hearing,
Oh.
so not yet. Thank you.
Can I, any public to speak on this matter this evening? None in the hall, any online?
Nope.
We'll close the public hearing
Thank you.
and entertain a motion.
The show is over. We have no public. Mr. Deputy Mayor, I move to approve the preliminary budget as presented.
Motion's been made and seconded. Do you want to speak to your motion, Steppy? Any other comments on the motion? All those in favor? All those opposed, like sign. Matter passes unanimously. And on to communications from our city attorney. A resolution, I believe, is 2213, a resolution approving a service agreement and memorandum of understanding between the City of Whitefish and the Whitefish Community Library Board of Trustees. Angie.
Good evening. So back in 2010, the council established the Whitefish Community Library Board of Trustees. As you probably are all aware, the library has been a huge asset to this community, and they do a great job. So if you haven't visited your community library, please do so. So libraries are really unique creatures under Montana law. The board is appointed by the mayor with the consent of council. However, they operate very independently. Other than approving their budget, they're pretty much their own creature. They can contract, they can accept gifts, they have their own bylaws, and The library director, Joey, is appointed by the board and serves at its pleasure. And the board, with recommendation of the library director, actually hires, fires, and handles all disciplinary actions against library employees. So a few months ago, MMIA, which is Montana Municipal Interlocal Authority, gave us notice that they are intending to exclude their coverage for libraries under their workers' comp, their liability, and their employee benefits program. They perceived a high risk of loss given the fact that the city really doesn't have statutorily the ability to control the employee relations. There must have been a rogue librarian somewhere, but we don't really have that backstory. So MMI said they were going to exclude coverage. However, there is a way for the library to opt into coverage, and that's by entering into MOU with the city that contains certain underwriting criteria. The library, of course, does want to continue their coverage with MMIA. It would be, prohibitively expensive for them to go out and find their own coverage. So I drafted the enclosed agreement based on a template actually sent by MMIA. I don't know that it does a lot to change the relationship that we've had with the library, but it does memorialize it so they can continue coverage. So basically it provides that MMIA, the city through MMIA, will continue to provide coverage for the library. It clarifies that the library employees are actually employees of the city, which has actually been sort of a gray area of law, and that they will follow our personnel policies, which they've been doing for years anyway. So not a huge plan there. It does require the library board and library director to confer with the city manager and our human resources director on certain employment decisions. And it also requires them to work with the city when determining salary structures. So again, it's not a huge change with how we've been operating for the library, but it will be important for them to continue with our insurance coverage. So there's no immediate financial requirements, and staff and the Board of Trustees did approve the MOU at their last meeting. So staff does respectfully request that the council approve the service agreement. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for Angie on her staff report? Seeing none, I would be willing to entertain a motion.
Deputy Mayor, I move to approve the MOU as it's meeting, well, the MOU is proposed by the staff with the library.
Been made and seconded. Any further comment or discussion, Giuseppe? Not seeing any. All those in favor? All those opposed, like sign, and the matter passes unanimously. And on we go to communications from our city manager. Written reports included in the packet. Any updates, Dana?
I would just, point out that our next meeting is Tuesday, July 5th, and that the Whitefish Strategic Housing Plan Committee next Monday, June 27th, starting at 2 p.m., 2 to 5 p.m., will kick off its 2022 Housing Refresh, which is what we're calling the Needs Assessment Update and the Strategic Plan Update. We have the committee that'll be working on that, bringing in some, we've invited some key stakeholders in the community, and the public is welcome to attend. So that will be the first meeting that we'll be holding with that plan. That's all I have.
Any questions for Dana on her staff report? Seeing none. We're now to communications from the mayor and city councilors. We'll begin with you, Giuseppe. Anything this evening? Steve? Ben?
I would make a quick comment about council goals, just to circle back there for 1 second. I appreciate that we got to go over that today. I had a short list of stuff going into that meeting, and I just had one or two that we didn't get a chance to talk about, and I thought I'd just mention it and see if either one are huge. But the first is the Big Mountain annexation itself. I know if that happens, I know that's a very big and very complicated endeavor, and I'm wondering if that should be its own council goal or something to study it, just to understand what the impacts of that would be.
So we do have to study it before we even move forward. I will say the minute you put it on here, I'm gonna get calls from the fire district, the sewer district, and a lot of people that live up there. And so that's why I'm hesitant to make it a goal if we really aren't working on it yet. Because when we put the one on about policing and that actually talked about the annexation, I got many calls, requested many meetings to start talking about it, but I'm like, we're not at that process yet. So that's my only hesitation of putting it on here if we're not gonna start working on it right away, because a lot of them are looking at, we had the fire department said, hey, we're purchasing a truck. Do we even purchase it right now? Or are you guys moving forward with annexation? And there is a lot of study and meetings that are gonna have to take place. It's going to be a long process, but unless we intend to start working on it this coming fiscal year, I would wait and probably put it on next fiscal year's goals, only because it causes a reaction that is just, it causes confusion because they're gonna think that we're moving forward quicker than not. That's my only recommendation, but I'm happy to do what the council wanted. They are your goals, but.
No, that makes a lot of sense to me. The second one that I had was a public participation policy. And I think where I got this idea, I didn't make this up. This actually goes back to the Mary Flowers lawsuit that had to do with the housing policy that was adopted. And as you may know, I had significant disagreements with that lawsuit. However, I did think there was one good suggestion in there, and that had to do with having an actual written policy around how our boards and committees in particular operate with respect to public process. So that would be defining what subcommittees can and can't do in public meetings, or what committees can and can't do in public or non-public meetings. What is the role of subcommittees or people doing work outside of the public process, and just having it kind of written down and something we can adopt. And I actually did think that was a good idea that was suggested at that time. I know that lawsuit is now gone, but it still seemed like something that could be worth following up on at some point, if there was appetite to do so.
Angie, do you have any comment on this? I know you and I have discussed this a number of times.
We have, and yes, I am actually probably 80% done with the policy. I just need you guys to direct me to bring it forward.
Great, thank you. Any other, Rebecca?
Yeah, I have a few more that I wanted to bring up. One kind of goes along with what Ben was just saying, is an ethics policy revision and education for volunteers and staff. We have not addressed that for 12, 13, 14 years. I was on the committee when it was done, and then the council at that time didn't pass it through. But I think given how complex our planning is, and I'm just gonna tell you, I think these things should be addressed at some point. Another one is succession planning. I think the council needs to think about how we're developing leadership amongst people that can rise up through the boards and then sit up here at some point. The staff is only 40% living in town, but I just worry about people not living here and not having help running the city, which is a lot of volunteers. A third one is that we might consider staff housing, literally buying housing for people to use if they come here to accept a job while they're looking, and also emergency housing. And then another one is a protection board for the river, not just the lake. And the traffic engineering to be done in-house. I've yet to see an traffic engineering report that I felt like was, I guess, unbiased towards proceeding, even with safety issues. And that's it. I just wanted to put them out there, even though we're not talking about goals anymore tonight. And then another one was, I was wondering about Lisa's idea of bringing up Juneteenth as a holiday for next year, if that's a possibility.
Is that a question for me? Rebecca kind of looked at me.
Whoever makes those
I'm like,
decisions, probably Dana.
So city council decides what paid city holidays there are. Currently, the state of Montana has recognized Juneteenth, but did not make it a paid state holiday. That said, it's a federal paid holiday. The banks were all closed today. They are all paid. Bozeman, Missoula, there's some other small communities that are doing it too, are taking off Juneteenth. I will say that there does come a cost with it with police and fire because they earn personal time off. Other than that, it's more simply just closure of City Hall for the day. Personally, I support it, but again, this is up to the council, and I don't support it. I support it because we have Good Friday, and honestly, when you look at Good Friday as a holiday, and that is a very much a religious holiday. I'm not sure, that was created way back when. I have a hard time not supporting all federal holidays that are currently in place, and so we had followed all federal holidays. Now we aren't, and we do have that extra holiday. I will say it's going to be hard to negotiate with unions to move Good Friday, say, to Juneteenth. It's a lot easier to negotiate just an additional holiday, but again, that's an additional city benefit to employees, so you would be looking at it as a employee benefit increase. So it's up to the council to move forward with that. Recognizing the holiday without, not having it be a quote-unquote paid holiday, I would say is at least one step. I have had employees ask me, I will tell you, a lot of employees have asked me why we don't get Juneteenth off. And so that is a question that just comes up because it's the only federal holiday that we aren't following.
I would be interested in pursuing more discussion on that. I think it's a very significant thing in a democracy to celebrate freedom, especially what we're going through right now is in the world and in the country. So, but I don't know how other people feel about it.
I would add one more thing is, we do have diverse staff. We don't have a lot of diversity in this community, but we do have individuals, we have individuals of all races, and I think that it is supportive when you are seeing that done at the federal level. Why don't we do that at the local level? And if our policies have been that we are inclusive, I think that it does show, effort. Whether, again, like I said, recognized as a holiday or a paid holiday, that's going to be a financial decision the council should make.
Okay. Can I make a motion to ask the other counselors what they think and then move this forward?
Sure.
Okay, I make a motion to have Dana our city manager come back to us with a proposal for honoring Juneteenth as a federal holiday and as a city holiday.
Like a holiday off, closed, paid holiday.
Would it be the only unpaid holiday that we have? Oh,
yeah, it would be. We wouldn't necessarily call it a holiday if we didn't do it that way. So I would say it's a paid holiday.
Yeah, I would say paid too. Yeah. Any seconds?
I'd be happy to second for discussion if nothing else. I think we ought to have an evaluation of it. I think your analysis, Dana, is right on. I mean, it's the only federal holiday that we don't follow, probably statewide as well as on a local level. And I, quite frankly, don't see why either. So I think it's certainly something we ought to discuss and have more airing on. And so I'd like to see an evaluation of that. And, Sherry should be involved in how we evaluate this thing. So I'd be in favor of seeing that at some point in the near future. Everybody agree with that? Yeah. Okay, good.
Thank you, Dana, for the explanation too. That's all. Thank you, guys.
Andy?
Nothing other than happy solstice, even though it's still puffy coat season. I know it doesn't quite seem like it should be solstice tomorrow.
5:41 tomorrow, summer starts.
The only thing I do want to say, just because there's been a lot of people out on the lake, and the lake is super full of junk right now, dock pieces and everything else. And I can't tell you the number of paddleboarders I see go by my home not wearing a PFD and not wearing a leash also. And Chief, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but you stand a 50-50 chance of making a 50-yard swim in 50-degree water, and that water's colder than 50 degrees right now. And it's just a matter of time before somebody falls off their board and it shoots 30 feet away from them and they don't get to it. And I just really encourage, and I had someone actually the other day that I'd made the comment to, and they go, oh, well, I got stopped by FWP because I didn't even have a PFD on my board. And it is a state watercraft and is recognized as such, and you are required to have a PFD. So I just hope people are super careful out there. And it is a mess, and I would always encourage people too, if you're down at City Beach, pick up some sticks and stick them in the garbage can or put them in a pile or something, because I mean, the lake, it's flushing like a toilet right now after 15 years of low water, and this is probably the highest lake level we've ever had, and so there's 15 years plus buildup of stuff, and I mean, I've seen docks going down the river, and it's just a mess. So anyway, so that's the other thing to people, clean your beaches up. It's just, because water does come up at some point. So there you go. That's it.
Great, thanks, Andy. And I have nothing, anything else from staff? We are adjourned. Thanks.